There is a house on Evergreen Terrace that has not changed in 36 years. The paint is the same color it has always been. The car in the driveway is the same. The television inside is always on, casting the same warm flicker through the same front window. And if you look through that window on any given Sunday evening, you will see the same family on the same couch. A large man in a white shirt with a round face and a permanently surprised expression, a woman with a gravity-defying tower of blue hair, and the patient eyes of someone who has survived everything and expects to survive whatever comes next, a spiky-haired boy with the look of someone about to do something he will deny, a girl with glasses and a sharp expression that sees more than most of the adults around her, and a baby with a pacifier who has been 1 year old for as long as anyone can remember. The Simpsons, the most famous family in the history of American television. Tonight we are going through every mystery Springfield has ever generated, every fan theory, every buried storyline, every unexplained impossibility, every moment where the show showed you something strange and then looked away before you could ask about it. And we are going to rank them, from the mildly peculiar all the way down to the theories so profound and so thoroughly supported by the show's own evidence that they change what The Simpsons actually is. This is a journey through 36 years of Springfield's secrets. It is going to take a while, so get comfortable. Let the room go dark and quiet. Close your eyes if you want to. The voice will carry you. And when you wake up, Springfield will still be there. It always is. Rank 10. The town that exists nowhere and everywhere at once. The impossible geography of Springfield. Begin with the simplest question you could possibly ask about a fictional town. Where is it? Springfield. Where is Springfield? The Simpsons has been on the air since 1989. The show has produced, at this count, 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes. During that time, Springfield has been the setting for virtually every story the show has ever told. It is the home base, the reference point, the town at the center of the universe the show has built. And in all of that time, across all of those episodes and all of those years, the answer to the simple question of where Springfield is located has never been consistently provided. This sounds like a minor creative decision. Shows often locate themselves in fictional places to give the writers flexibility. But with The Simpsons, the geographic evasion is not casual or careless. It is deliberate, sustained, and so thorough that it has produced contradictions stacking on top of each other for decades. Contradictions so numerous and so specific that the overall effect is not ambiguity, but active impossibility. Springfield does not just lack a confirmed location. Springfield actively resists having one. Every clue that seems to narrow the possibilities is eventually overruled by another clue that opens them back up. Let us walk through the evidence the show has accumulated on this question, because it is genuinely remarkable when you put it all in one place. The state question. Different episodes place Springfield in different states or suggest different state-level contexts without ever committing to one. At various points in the series, Springfield is suggested or depicted as being in Ohio, Nevada, Maine, Kentucky, Oregon, Missouri, and others. Some of these states are geographically neighboring, which would at least allow for some interpretation of the borders, but many of them are not. Ohio and Nevada are not adjacent. Maine and Kentucky are not close to each other. The show is not depicting a town near a specific state boundary. The show is depicting a town that exists in a different state depending on which episode you are watching. The phone area code visible in certain episodes begins with 636, which is a real area code belonging to parts of eastern Missouri, particularly certain suburban and rural areas outside of St. Louis. This is the kind of detail that should settle the question of state. If the show uses a real Missouri area code for Springfield's phone numbers, Springfield is in Missouri. Except Springfield cannot be in Missouri because Missouri is landlocked and Springfield has a harbor, a working harbor with ships and docking facilities that have appeared in multiple episodes. You cannot have a Missouri town with ocean access. The detail exists in tension with another detail. They cannot both be true. Both of them are in the show. The harbor itself is its own problem. Springfield's waterfront has been depicted in enough episodes with enough specificity that it is clearly intentional. There is a harbor master. There are docks. Boats come and go. The community has a relationship with the sea. This places Springfield somewhere on a coast, which immediately rules out most of the landlocked states the show has suggested at other times. But Springfield also has a mountain range, a real one, with alpine landscapes and snow-capped peaks and skiing infrastructure. The mountain is visible from town in multiple episodes. Characters have climbed it, or driven toward it, or referenced it as a significant geographic feature of the local landscape. Mountains of this scale, the kind that support ski resorts and create dramatic visible skylines, do not typically coexist with oceanfront harbors in the same small town. The geography required to have both features within driving distance of a single residential community does not exist in standard American topography. Springfield has a desert, clearly depicted in episodes with cactus and arid landscape and the visual language of the American Southwest, within what the show implies is a reasonable distance from town. It has dense forest, the kind of old-growth woodland that suggests the Pacific Northwest or New England. It has farmland, flat and open, stretching to the horizon in the way that farmland does in the Midwest. Springfield has all of the geographic features of America simultaneously, concentrated into a single, unremarkable mid-sized city. The state abbreviation has occasionally appeared in the show. The abbreviation NT was used at one point. There is no American state with the abbreviation NT. NT is the abbreviation for the Northern Territory of Australia, which is very far from Springfield by any geographic accounting. The writers either made an error, which seems unlikely given the level of deliberateness the show applies to its geographic contradictions, or they chose an abbreviation specifically because it cannot refer to any existing American state. Matt Groening, the show's creator, addressed the question in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He gave what seemed to be a definitive answer. He said he named Springfield after Springfield, Oregon, because he grew up near it, and because Springfield is one of the most commonly used city names in America, existing in some form in nearly every state. He chose it for its universality, so that every viewer would feel some connection to a Springfield they might have encountered in their own life. The admission created an enormous stir. For approximately 2 days, the mystery seemed solved. Springfield was in Oregon. The creator had said so directly, in a named publication, with apparent sincerity, and then the show continued airing new episodes that placed Springfield in geographic contexts inconsistent with Oregon. The writers did not honor the confession. The contradictions kept coming. The mystery reinstated itself, as if Groening's words had never been spoken. This is the moment when the geographic mystery stops being a production convenience and starts being something more deliberate and more interesting. There is a surface-level explanation for all of this, and it is true as far as it goes. Springfield is designed to be universal. It is designed to feel like a place that could be anywhere in America, to resonate with viewers regardless of their regional background, to function as a kind of composite American small city that contains something familiar for everyone. The contradictions are how you keep the setting universal. If you pin it to Oregon, it stops feeling like it could be your town. If you leave it anywhere and everywhere, it belongs to everyone. This explanation is confirmed by everyone involved in the show. It is the official reason. It is the actual reason that guided the original decision. But there is another reading available, one that sits alongside the official explanation rather than replacing it, and this other reading connects Springfield's geography to everything else that is wrong with Springfield. Consider what it means practically for Burns's power plant. Burns operates a nuclear facility with 342 documented safety violations. He has dumped radioactive waste into public waterways. He has contaminated the local environment to a degree that the federal government eventually determined required physical containment. He has done all of this within the borders of a residential community, to a population that lives and works and raises children in the affected zone, and none of it has been meaningfully prosecuted. Environmental law in the United States is administered at the state level as well as the federal level. The EPA operates federally, but state environmental agencies have their own jurisdiction, their own enforcement mechanisms, their own authority to investigate and charge and require remediation. The state in which Burns operates his plant has authority over that plant. The state's attorney general can investigate. The state's environmental agency can impose fines and remediation requirements. State courts can hear cases brought by affected residents, but to use any of those mechanisms, you need to know which state you are in. If Springfield's location is jurisdictionally undefined, If the state-level authority is perpetually ambiguous because the town keeps shifting between state contexts, the regulatory framework loses its grip. Nobody can file a state case because nobody can agree on which state's law applies. Nobody can engage the state attorney general because the attorney general's jurisdiction ends at the state line, and nobody can establish which side of which state line Springfield falls on. The federal EPA can act independently of state jurisdiction, which is why the agency in the Simpsons movie was able to seal the town under a dome. But the EPA's ability to prosecute criminal environmental violations, to hold individual operators accountable, to impose the kind of consequences that would actually stop what Burns is doing, requires the support of state-level cooperation that is harder to organize when the state context is perpetually in question. Springfield floats between states because floating is more comfortable than landing. Landing means coordinates. Coordinates mean jurisdiction. Jurisdiction means accountability. And accountability is precisely the thing that the power plant and the man who runs it have spent decades engineering their way around. A town with no fixed location has no fixed regulatory authority, no consistent oversight structure, no permanent institutional relationship with any state-level enforcement mechanism, no baseline legal framework that can be reliably applied to what is happening inside its borders. Springfield is everywhere because being everywhere is the most effective possible way to be nowhere on the map that matters, the map of who is responsible, who has oversight, who can be made to answer for what has been done to this town. Now let us add one more layer, because the show has not just been inconsistent about Springfield's geographic location, it has occasionally given a specific answer and then retracted it. The episode Behind the Laughter aired in the 12th season. It is structured as a VH1, behind-the-music-style mockumentary about the Simpsons family, complete with a narrator and interview segments and a dramatic telling of the family's rise and near fall. In the original broadcast version of this episode, Springfield is explicitly stated to be in northern Kentucky. The narrator says so clearly. It is in the script. It was broadcast to however many millions of viewers watched the original air date. In syndicated reruns, that line was changed. The stated location became a different state. The answer to the geographic question changed depending on which version of the episode you happened to watch. Even when the show provided a definitive answer, that answer was not permanent. It was revised for later audiences. The truth, such as it was, had a shelf life. And when that shelf life expired, it was quietly replaced with a different truth. This is exactly what Springfield does with all uncomfortable truths. It provides them temporarily and then revises them when they become inconvenient, relying on the audience's normalized acceptance of inconsistency to absorb the revision without friction. The geographic revision in Behind the Laughter is not a mistake or a licensing issue or an editing error. It is the show doing to its own stated answer what Springfield does to any established fact that threatens the comfortable continuity of the town's agreed-upon reality. It quietly makes it go away and replaces it with something more manageable. Every state in the Union has been theorized as Springfield's home at some point. Every theory has evidence, and every theory has contradictions. Dedicated fans have spent years trying to pin the coordinates down, analyzing visual details in the background of episodes, cross-referencing stated facts with actual American geography, building spreadsheets of clues and counterclues. The show has been more productive than any of them. For every clue that seems to settle the question, the show has eventually produced another one that unsettles it again. Springfield is not a mystery you solve. Springfield is a mystery you inhabit. You live inside it the way Springfield's residents live inside it, moving through a place that feels completely real from the inside and cannot be located from the outside. It is home, and it is nowhere at once. The writers decided long ago that Springfield is more useful as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. A town that belongs to everyone cannot be shut down, cannot be evacuated, cannot be identified as someone's specific regulatory responsibility. Springfield exists outside of the ordinary jurisdiction of accountability, and that, above everything else, is what the people inside it need it to do. Drop a comment letting us know what time it is and where you are watching from. It is always wonderful to see where people find their way to Springfield. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do. We are going to be here for a while, and there is much more to explore. Rank 9. The strange immortality of Hans Moleman, the man who cannot stay dead and may not be who he says he is. There is a small man in Springfield who deserves much more attention than he typically receives. He is barely visible most of the time. He occupies the margins and the backgrounds, shuffling through the scenes where the important characters are doing important things, appearing briefly, usually just long enough for something catastrophic to happen to him, and then disappearing again. He is easy to overlook. He is almost designed to be overlooked. Small, elderly-looking, nearly blind without his enormous, thick-lensed glasses, moving through the world with the careful deliberateness of someone who has learned that the world tends to surprise him with pain. His name is Hans Moleman, and he has been killed more times than any other character in the history of American animation. Let that sit with you for a moment. Not the most killed character in The Simpsons, the most killed character in the history of American animation as a medium. Decades of cartoon deaths, across every major studio, every major property, every character designed to absorb spectacular comedic punishment, and Hans Moleman has more canonical deaths to his credit than any of them. He has been hit by cars, in multiple separate incidents, in multiple different episodes. He has been crushed by falling objects of various descriptions. He has been buried alive. He has been mauled by animals ranging from ordinary to exotic. He has been set on fire. He has been drowned. He has been electrocuted. He has walked directly and without apparent awareness into active traffic, and the camera has cut away at the moment of impact, leaving the result to implication, which is sufficient. He has fallen from heights. He has been struck by projectiles. He has been the incidental casualty of disasters that were aimed at someone else entirely, and in every single case he returns. There is no explanation. There is no resurrection scene. There is no moment where the show acknowledges that this particular person died in a previous episode and has since been restored to a living state. He simply appears again, exactly as before, in the background or at the periphery of whatever new scenario Springfield has generated, ready to be killed again. The deaths are not in special episodes, not in the Treehouse of Horror Halloween specials, where non-canonical mayhem is the established format, not in dream sequences or fantasy segments where the rules of reality are openly suspended. They are in the regular episodes. The main continuity, the canonical ongoing story of Springfield. Hans Moleman dies in the canonical story of Springfield, repeatedly and without consequence. And this is treated as background noise, something that happens in the margins of scenes that are about other things. A gag so embedded in the show's texture that most viewers no longer register it as requiring any explanation. But everything in Springfield requires explanation. That is what we have established tonight. Here is the detail about Hans Moleman that changes the texture of everything described above. Hans Moleman has stated his age on camera, 31 years old. He said it directly in a scene with another character, establishing his age as 31 as clearly as the show establishes any piece of character information. 31. Study Hans Moleman. Look at him carefully. The texture of his skin, the curvature of his posture, the quality of his voice, the way he moves. By any visual and auditory assessment, Hans Moleman presents as someone between 80 and 100 years old. He is a visual representation of very extreme age, and he has been this since his first appearance. He says he is 31. The show delivers this as comedy. The gap between his appearance and his stated age is enormous enough to be funny in the way that enormous gaps between expectation and reality are funny. The laugh comes from the disparity. The joke is done and the show moves on. But if you take the claim at face value, even just as a starting point for exploration, the implications are remarkable. Something aged Hans Moleman before his time. Something took a person who by all rights should be in the early years of his adult life, a person with decades of unrealized potential ahead of him, and compressed the visible effects of a lifetime of aging into a body that has only been alive for 3 decades. In Springfield, in a town where a nuclear power plant has been leaking radioactive contamination into the environment for decades, the mechanisms for this kind of accelerated aging exist. Radiation exposure at sufficient levels and sufficient duration does not merely increase cancer risk or reduce immune function. Chronic radiation exposure at the cellular level disrupts the telomere maintenance systems that govern how quickly cells age. It compromises the body's ability to repair normal cellular damage. It accelerates the visible and physiological markers of aging in ways that, in extreme cases, can make a person appear decades older than their chronological age. Molman is 31 years old and he looks 90 because Springfield did this to him. He was born into the contamination zone, or he arrived there young enough that his developmental biology was exposed to the environment during a critical period. And whatever the power plant's runoff did to Homer's cognitive function and to the general population's yellow skin and four-fingered hands, it did something more extreme to Molman's cellular aging processes. It ran them at a dramatically accelerated rate. It consumed his apparent youth while he was still a young man. He has been visibly ancient for his entire adult life, and he has been dying and returning throughout that life. Which brings us to the stranger and more interesting question underneath the obvious one. Why does he come back? If the radiation accelerated his aging, something about the same exposure did something else entirely to his relationship with death. Not just survival, which Homer also demonstrates in spectacular fashion, but actual resurrection. Molman does not merely survive near-death experiences. In many of his canonical deaths, the show is clear that he has actually died. The camera does not look away at the moment of mortal impact and then show him alive again with the implication that perhaps he survived after all. In some of his deaths, the finality is explicit, and then he is back. Under the radiation theory, the most disturbing possible explanation is that Molman's cellular biology has been so thoroughly disrupted by decades of nuclear contamination that his body has developed an abnormal regenerative capacity as a compensatory mutation. When ordinary cellular repair mechanisms are damaged or overwhelmed, biology sometimes responds by building unusual alternatives. Evolution under extreme stress produces unusual adaptations. In a science fiction context, in a universe where the contamination from a nuclear plant has already produced a three-eyed fish and a population with non-standard anatomy, the idea that the same contamination could produce in one individual a cellular regeneration process capable of rebuilding after fatal trauma is not a category error. It is the logical extreme of what the contamination is already doing to people, pushed further in one specific case. Molman dies and comes back because his cells have been trained by decades of exposure to rebuild from damage that would permanently end normal biology. He is not just aging faster, he is cycling. Birth, death, regeneration, and the cycle begins again, endlessly, in the body of a man who is 31 years old and looks like he has been living this cycle for a century. The coma theory frames Molman differently, but no less strangely. If Springfield is Homer's dream, Molman is a background process. He is the kind of character that a dreaming mind generates to populate the spaces where the dream's main characters are not present, to give the simulated town a texture of habitation, to make Springfield feel like a place with many residents rather than a stage set with only a few significant players. Background processes in dreams are not maintained with the same fidelity that main narrative threads are. When the dream does not need Molman for a given scene, it lets him go. When the next scene needs him, it reconstructs him from available memory. The reconstruction is close enough to the original that nobody in the dream questions whether this is the same person who died last week, because the dream does not track that level of continuity for its minor characters. Molman dies because Homer's dreaming mind periodically forgets to maintain him. He returns because the dream needs him in the next scene, and Homer's unconscious reconstructs him from memory. The resurrection is not a miracle. It is a continuity error in a dream that does not bother to be internally consistent about people it does not care much about. This is, in a strange way, the saddest possible interpretation of a character who already exists to be pitied. Hans Molman is so peripheral to the story, Homer is dreaming that his life and death are both equally disposable. He exists when the dream needs him and ceases to exist when it does not, and then exists again when it does. His deaths are not meaningful even within the tragedy of a dreaming mind, because he is not meaningful enough to the dreamer for his death to register as something that should be preserved or mourned. In the collective denial reading, Molman's death cycle is simply one more thing Springfield has decided not to see. The town has an established practice of looking away from things that would require uncomfortable questions. The three-eyed fish in the river was not an alarm. The glowing billionaire in the woods was categorized as a possible alien rather than an obvious symptom of radiation exposure. The skeletons in the basement of the power plant went unexamined, And a man who dies in the background of public spaces and returns to die again receives no investigation, no follow-up, no inquiry into how this is medically possible. Springfield has normalized the death cycle the way it has normalized everything else. Molman dies in a public park in view of several witnesses, and nobody calls an ambulance. Because this is just what Molman does. It has happened before, it will happen again. And in a town that has collectively trained itself not to ask questions about the things happening in front of it, the question of how a person keeps coming back from death does not rise to the level of civic conversation. There is another piece of information about Molman that the show introduces quietly and then abandons. Hans Molman has acknowledged that Hans Molman is not his real name. His real name is Ralph Mellish. He said this plainly, in a scene with another character. Ralph Mellish became Hans Molleman at some point. The show does not explain when or how or why. The information is delivered, registered by the other character with whatever brief reaction the scene calls for, and then the scene moves on, and the show never addresses it again. But consider what it means. There is a person named Ralph Mellish who exists somewhere underneath Hans Molman. A man with an original identity, an original history, presumably an original context for his existence before whatever process transformed him into the small, perpetually imperiled figure that Springfield's background has come to depend on. What happened to Ralph Mellish? What happened between the version of this person who had a name and a self, and whatever the circumstances of a beginning, and the version that the show depicts, shuffling through Springfield's margins and dying regularly without notice? The show does not say. The show has given you the gap, the distance between who this person was and who he has become, and offered you nothing to fill it with. Just the name, Ralph Mellish. And the implicit acknowledgement that the person carrying it is not living the life he started with. In a town that replaced its principal's identity with an imposter and voted to make that imposter the legal reality. In a town where the truth of a person's identity is a negotiable rather than a fixed thing. In a town where a man can live inside a borrowed name for 20 years and have a judge rule that the borrowed name is now the real one. The fact that Hans Molleman is actually Ralph Mellish barely even registers as notable. Springfield is full of people living inside identities that do not quite fit them. Molman is simply the case where the mismatch happens to be attached to a character the show has given no backstory, leaving the gap entirely open. Ralph Mellish is in there somewhere, 31 years old or however old he actually is now if the show's timeline were consistent, living inside the name and the body and the circumstances of Hans Molleman, dying on a regular basis and coming back without memory of the last death, shuffling through the background of a dream or a contamination zone or a community committed to not seeing the things happening inside it. Hans Molleman is the quietest argument for everything being wrong in Springfield. He is the thing that should make everyone stop and ask questions, and instead makes everyone walk past him on the way to somewhere else. He is, in a small and unremarkable way, the most Springfield person in Springfield. Rank 8. The Programmed Saint, what the show has done to Ned Flanders, and why it is more disturbing than almost anything else in the series. If you asked most people who the happiest character in The Simpsons is, the answer would probably be Ned Flanders. And if you looked at Ned Flanders' actual life, and the things that have happened to him across 3.5 decades of this show, you would understand very quickly that happiness is not the right word. Performing happiness is closer. Performing happiness under conditions that would, in a normally functioning human being, make happiness completely impossible. Ned is the contrast character. The show established this from early on and has maintained it consistently. He is everything Homer is not, in almost every category. Where Homer is physically soft and largely unmotivated, Ned is physically fit in a way that the show has occasionally commented on, because the joke of a deeply religious middle-aged man having a genuinely excellent body runs in a slightly different comedic direction than most of the physical comedy the show produces. Where Homer is financially careless and frequently in debt, Ned is financially responsible, the owner of a successful small business, the manager of a household that functions within its means. Where Homer is indifferent to his neighbors and barely registers their needs, Ned is attentive and generous. The person who shows up when something is needed, who lends things that are never returned and does not ask for them back. And where Homer mostly gets away with everything, Ned mostly does not. The universe of The Simpsons, if it has anything resembling a moral architecture, does not apply that architecture consistently between these two men. Homer survives everything. Homer's mistakes are absorbed without permanent consequence. Homer loses things and gets them back, or finds replacements that are just as good. Homer's life, for all its chaos and carelessness, maintains a basic structural integrity that is not particularly related to anything Homer has done to deserve it. Ned does the things you are supposed to do, and the universe takes them away. His wife Maude was killed by a t-shirt cannon at a NASCAR event. The context of her death is important because it makes the assignment of responsibility both clear and cruelly ironic. Homer was sitting in Ned's vicinity in the bleachers. The promotional team was firing t-shirts into the crowd. Homer, displaying the reflexive self-preservation instinct that has protected him across hundreds of dangerous situations, ducked out of the way of an incoming t-shirt. Because Homer moved, the trajectory of the projectiles shifted, and the t-shirts that would have been absorbed by Homer's body instead struck Maude, knocked her from the bleachers, and killed her. Homer's survival instinct, which operates automatically and without moral consideration, directly caused the death of his neighbor's wife. Ned forgave him. And this is not a dramatic, hard-won, costly forgiveness that represented genuine spiritual work on Ned's part. It was the immediate, uncomplicated, almost reflexive forgiveness of a man whose entire emotional architecture has been built around never sustaining anger directed at another person. He forgave Homer the way you perform a habitual action that has been so thoroughly practiced that it no longer requires conscious effort. Maude was gone. Two boys needed to be raised without their mother. And the man whose actions, however unintentionally, had created this situation continued to live next door, continued to borrow tools that did not come back, continued to be Homer, and Ned continued to wave at him over the fence and say neighborly things and demonstrate in every visible way that no residue of resentment had been allowed to form. Because it could not form. Ned was built not to let it form. The episode that reveals this, the one where Ned's behavioral history is finally made explicit, follows a hurricane. A hurricane destroys Ned's house. The community rallies to rebuild it. And the community, being composed of Springfield residents with the skills and attention to detail you would expect of Springfield residents, rebuilds it so badly that the structure collapses the moment Ned actually tries to live inside it, and Ned snaps. Not in the quiet, dignified way of someone who has been holding too much for too long and has finally chosen to set it down. In the sudden, flooding, uncontrollable way of someone whose entire psychological dam has broken and is letting everything through at once. He screams at the town. He says things about individual people that are specific and pointed and clearly drawn from observations he has been making for a very long time, processing silently and storing somewhere he was not supposed to be able to access. He is institutionalized. He is sent to a mental health facility. And in that facility, the doctor who treats him reveals something about Ned's history that recontextualizes everything the show has depicted about him. Ned's parents were beatniks. They were people who had philosophically committed themselves to the rejection of conventional behavioral norms, including the conventional behavioral norm of disciplining children. They believed in complete permissiveness. They believed the natural child, left to develop without correction or structure, would find its own authentic expression. Young Ned, left entirely to his own devices, did not find an authentic expression of a well-adjusted self. Young Ned was, by the account the show provides, genuinely out of control, violent, disruptive, impossible for his environment to manage. The absence of any external framework for his behavior had produced not freedom, but chaos, a child running on unfiltered impulse with no internal governor and no external mechanism to slow him down. His parents, recognizing that something had gone wrong, took him to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist, over a period of years, employing techniques that the show describes in terms that do not correspond to any recognized and ethical therapeutic approach, conditioned the aggression and the wildness out of Ned, built, piece by piece, a psychological structure inside him that suppressed the problematic behaviors with enough thoroughness that they could no longer reliably surface. Built a Ned who would smile when Homer broke his fence and cheerfully offer to help repair it. Built a Ned who would forgive the man whose self-preservation instinct killed his wife. built a Ned who would never allow the anger that lives in him somewhere to actually organize itself into any action that addressed the things he had every right to be angry about. The doctor's assessment when he encounters adult Ned is essentially that the treatment worked, in the technical sense that the behaviors it was designed to suppress are in fact suppressed, but that it was not good medicine. It addressed symptoms rather than causes. It built a cage around a part of Ned's personality rather than working with him to develop genuine emotional regulation. The result is a man who cannot feel his own anger in any productive or useful way, who has instead a surface positivity covering a depth of unprocessed experience that has nowhere to go. When the dam broke during the hurricane aftermath, that depth came through the crack all at once. Now consider what Ned's faith means in this context. Ned's faith is not a social habit. It is not the Sunday morning church attendance of someone going through a familiar motion. It is a comprehensive and genuine organizing framework for Ned's understanding of his own life. He prays. He reads the scripture with apparent seriousness. He structures his daily choices according to religious principles that he has internalized to the point where they feel like his own values rather than external commands. He is, within the universe of the show, as sincere a practitioner of faith as the show has ever depicted. And God within the universe of the show actually exists. God has appeared on camera multiple times. God has spoken directly to Homer Simpson, not in dreams or visions or metaphorical narrative framings, but in direct, face-to-face conversations that the show presents as canonical reality. Homer asked God questions, and God answered them. Homer received divine attention, divine recognition, divine engagement. God has never spoken to Ned. Ned prays into silence. Ned attends the church that Homer sleeps through, and Homer gets conversations with God, and Ned gets nothing back from the divine presence he has structured his entire life around trusting. This is not coincidental. The show has established this asymmetry clearly enough and maintained it consistently enough that it must be read as intentional. The show is making a statement about the universe it has built, about the moral logic that operates within Springfield's reality, and the statement is this: goodness is not rewarded in Springfield. Doing the right things does not produce better outcomes in Springfield. Living according to a principled framework does not attract divine favor in Springfield. Being patient and generous and forgiving and present and responsible, the full suite of things Ned consistently is, does not protect you from the things that the universe allows to take from you. Homer does everything wrong and gets by. Ned does everything right and loses his wife, watches his house collapse, loses his primary framework for understanding why any of it is happening to him, and does not receive an answer from the divine presence he has asked for one. The most devout man in Springfield, the man who has turned his faith into a lived practice and not just a performed one, sits in silence while God talks to the man who eats donuts during meltdown warnings at the nuclear plant. The cruelty of this is not accidental. It is the show's most precise and most devastating moral observation. It is a statement about how systems work, including the cosmic system Ned has put all his trust in. Systems do not reward goodness. Systems reward compliance and goodness are not the same thing, and Springfield is designed to make sure you know the difference. Homer is compliant. He is where he is supposed to be, doing what he is supposed to do, occupying the role the system built for him, too cognitively impaired by decades of radiation exposure to see the architecture clearly enough to push against it. His compliance produces stability, not because stability is his reward, but because stability is what the system looks like when nobody is pushing against it. Ned is also compliant, but in a different and sadder way. Ned was conditioned into compliance by a doctor who spent years building a psychological structure inside him that made non-compliance effectively inaccessible. Ned's goodness and Ned's compliance are intertwined so thoroughly that it is impossible, from the outside, to separate where the genuine values end and the conditioning begins. But the conditioning was built specifically to serve what other people needed from Ned, not to serve what Ned needed from himself. The doctor built a Ned who would be manageable and pleasant and non-disruptive. He did not build a Ned who would be equipped to process loss or grief or sustained injustice or the specific kind of spiritual silence that comes from praying to a God who answers your neighbor instead of you. Ned does not have the internal tools to process what his life has done to him. The conditioning took away the raw, unpleasant emotional machinery that would have allowed him to fight back, to rage against things, to metabolize difficult feelings in the messy and human way that messy and human processing requires. And it replaced it with a surface that performs wellness without actually containing it. The hurricane cracked the surface. What came through was everything underneath, decades of unprocessed grief and injustice, and the specific kind of spiritual loneliness that accumulates in a person who keeps offering their whole self to a relationship that does not seem to be reciprocating. The show put it all back in. The institution sent him back to Springfield with the surface intact, and Ned resumed his life, because that is what Ned does. He resumes, he absorbs, he keeps going, because that is what he was built to do. Homer and Ned have lived next door to each other for 36 years. The gap between them, the gap between the man who tries and does not get punished and the man who tries and loses everything anyway, has never once closed. The show has never given Ned a sustained period of things going well, has never allowed the cosmic ledger to balance in his direction in any way that feels proportionate to what has been taken from him. Because Springfield is not a place where ledgers balance. Springfield is a place where some people absorb the consequences of the system and others do not, and the distribution of who absorbs what is not correlated with virtue or effort or the sincerity of anyone's faith. Ned is the saddest person in Springfield. Not Homer, who is too cognitively compromised to fully comprehend the weight of his own circumstances. Not Lisa, who is young enough that some portion of her idealism still survives intact. Not Burns, who is too insulated by wealth to feel anything that wealth cannot address. Ned. Ned, who feels everything, who is built to feel everything and unable to express any of it in ways that would allow it to leave him. Who is kind because he was made that way, and good because he chose to be, and faithful because he has nothing else to hold on to, and whose God keeps talking to his neighbor instead, and who waves across the fence every morning at the man next door, because that is what Ned does. That is what Ned has always done. That is all Ned has. Rank 7. The case that was closed but never solved. Who really shot Mr. Burns, and why the official answer might be wrong. The summer of 1995 was the summer Springfield went to war with itself. Let us set the scene properly, because the events that led to the shooting were not spontaneous. They were the result of Burns methodically, almost cheerfully, destroying every institution and individual in Springfield that stood in his way. The escalation over the course of the season finale was so precisely designed that by the time Burns actually got shot, the list of people who wanted to shoot him had grown so long it had become meaningless as a suspect list. When everyone is a suspect, you effectively have no suspects. Burns had found oil under Springfield Elementary School. The school had been having financial difficulties, and the discovery of a significant oil deposit beneath the property would have resolved those difficulties permanently. It would have funded programs, hired teachers, replaced equipment that had been deteriorating for years, given the school a financial foundation it had not previously possessed. For the children who attended it, for the teachers who worked there, for everyone who had a stake in the quality of education Springfield provided to its youngest residents, the oil was genuinely good news. Burns immediately moved to take it for himself. He had legal mechanisms available for this, which he employed without hesitation. He drained the oil through his own infrastructure, redirecting the resource that was under the school's property to his own accounts. The school's budget was stripped. Programs were eliminated. The music program, which had given multiple Springfield residents access to something genuinely meaningful in their lives, was among the first casualties. Burns destroyed Moe's Tavern through a related financial maneuver. Moe Sislak, who had operated his bar for years as the de facto community center for a specific segment of Springfield's adult population, was bankrupted. The tavern, which was for Homer and Barney and Lenny and Carl, the place they went to be among people who knew them, without requiring anything more from them than their company, was gone. Burns created a sinkhole. The Springfield Retirement Castle, where Grandpa Simpson and dozens of other elderly residents of the community lived, was destabilized by the sinkhole and rendered uninhabitable. The elderly residents were displaced. The community that had formed there, the specific social world of people in the last chapters of their lives who had found each other in that place, was broken up. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, was injured in circumstances connected to Burns's activities. An animal that was beloved by the family and harmless to everyone was hurt because of what Burns was doing. And then, as a capstone to all of this, Burns built a device to block the sun. The details of this are worth sitting with, because they are more specific and more operationally audacious than is sometimes appreciated. Burns did not darken the sky through a side effect of some other project. He designed and constructed a mechanical disc, a large physical structure, specifically for the purpose of preventing sunlight from reaching Springfield. He deployed this device, he positioned it to block the sun, and his stated reason was commercial. He wanted to eliminate any energy source that was not his, specifically so that every resident of the town would be compelled to purchase electricity from the power plant because there would be no free natural light available as an alternative. Burns stole the sun from Springfield so that he could sell the sun back to Springfield in the form of electricity, at whatever price he chose to charge, because without natural light, the only alternative to paying him was darkness. This is the context in which the town meeting happened. This is the community that gathered in that room. People who had watched their children's school lose its resources. People who had lost their gathering place. Elderly people who had been displaced from their homes. The family of an injured dog. And everyone, every single resident of Springfield, living in artificial darkness because the richest man in town had decided that light itself should be a premium product. Multiple attendees arrived at the town meeting visibly armed. This is not background detail. This is the show establishing that multiple people in the room had crossed whatever internal threshold exists between wanting to hurt someone and being physically prepared to hurt someone. Burns was shot in the parking lot after the meeting. He staggered to the town sundial and collapsed, his hands falling across the face of the sundial, touching the letters W and S. Or, if you read them from Burns's downward perspective, M and S. His condition was critical. He was taken to the hospital. He entered a coma, and Springfield waited. The investigation that followed is one of the great comedic sequences in the show's history. Chief Wiggum and his department bringing their full and unimpressive capabilities to bear on a case that should, given the scope of the list of possible shooters, have been nearly impossible to solve through conventional means. Smithers provided the first major development when he confessed almost immediately. The problem with Smithers's confession was that Smithers had been blackout drunk during the relevant time period and had only a fragmentary understanding of what he had actually done that evening. His confession was sincere. He genuinely believed he had shot Burns. The investigation into his claim revealed that he had in fact shot a gun, but the bullet had struck old Jasper in the wooden leg. Smithers had been wandering Springfield in a state of complete inebriation, had discharged a weapon, and had somehow convinced himself that the impact he observed constituted the shooting of his employer. He was eliminated as a suspect. Not cleared exactly, but the specific crime he confessed to was not the one being investigated. One by one, the suspects with the strongest apparent motives were cleared by alibis or circumstantial evidence, or the absence of physical evidence connecting them to the specific event. The case narrowed through elimination, and then it narrowed further when laboratory analysis of a piece of physical evidence produced a result that seemed to resolve things definitively. An eyelash found on Burns's suit was analyzed. It belonged to a Simpson. The DNA was specific enough to point to a family member. Homer's fingerprints were found on the gun. Homer had been driven to what the show depicted as a genuine breaking point by Burns's consistent failure to remember his name, a sustained and specific humiliation that had worn on him across years of episodes. Treated as comedy but allowed to accumulate as something real in Homer's emotional interior, Homer was arrested. The case seemed resolved, and then Burns woke up. He identified the shooter, Maggie Simpson, baby Maggie. His account described an encounter in the parking lot after the meeting where he attempted to take Maggie's lollipop. The gun fell from his holster during the struggle. Maggie picked it up, and the gun discharged. The case was closed. No jury would convict a baby. Chief Wiggum said this explicitly, qualifying it with the single geographical exception that has been quoted many times since. And here is where the careful examination begins. The national contest that Fox ran throughout the summer was built on the promise that the mystery was solvable from the clues available in Part 1. This was not a small promotion. It was a significant cultural event, promoted heavily, covered by national media. The prize was real, being animated into a future episode of the show. The DVD commentary for the episodes, recorded years later by members of the production team, contains an acknowledgement, From the randomly selected sample of contest entries that were reviewed, not a single submission correctly identified the shooter. Nobody guessed Maggie. The one person who is known to have gotten the answer right did so on the night the episode aired, posting to a Simpsons news group online using a college internet account. By the time the production team tried to locate this person to award them the prize, the account had been deactivated. The writers acknowledged this directly on the commentary and issued a standing invitation for the person to come forward and claim whatever recognition was owed to them. As far as public record shows, they never did. The implications of the contest result are significant. The show claimed the mystery was solvable from the available clues. The show ran a national contest based on that claim. And when the answer was revealed, it turned out to be an answer that essentially no one had arrived at through logical analysis of the clues. Either the clues were insufficient, or the red herrings were too effective, or the answer did not follow from the evidence in the logical and traceable way that the show claimed it would. The contest was not won because the available evidence did not cleanly support the answer that was eventually given. Burns himself, in his account of events, stated explicitly that his hands pointing to the letters on the sundial was accidental. He did not position himself to spell out his attacker's initials. He fell and his hands landed where they landed. The most prominent visual clue in the episode, the one that seemed most clearly to point toward a specific answer, was described by the victim himself as a coincidence. The sundial was not a clue. It was an accident that the show then treated as a clue because it fit the answer that had already been chosen. The gun was missing from Burns's holster before the shooting. This is established in the episode. Whoever shot Burns used a gun that they did not bring with them to the town meeting. They found or took Burns's own weapon and used it against him. This is consistent with the baby finds gun scenario. It is also consistent with anyone in the parking lot after the meeting who encountered Burns's dropped weapon and had cause to use it. The pool of people for whom this evidence is consistent is much larger than one infant. Burns said, "Oh, it's you," before being shot. This is the most under-examined piece of evidence in the whole case, and it is the one that creates the most difficulty for the official answer. "Oh, it's you" is the phrase of recognition. It is not the sound of surprise. It is not the sound of someone who has encountered an unexpected adversary. It is the calm, almost resigned acknowledgement of someone who recognizes the person in front of them. Someone who knew, on some level, that this meeting was possible, or at least not shocking given everything that had happened. Burns barely knows Homer exists, despite Homer having worked for him for many years. Burns has never consistently remembered Homer's name across decades of employment, which is one of the primary running jokes between them. Does it seem consistent with Burns's established characterization that he would recognize Maggie Simpson, specifically, on site, in a parking lot after a chaotic town meeting, at a moment of personal crisis? Maggie, whose father he cannot name? Whose family's dog he injured? Whose school he helped defund? Burns would recognize people he had directly confronted or threatened. People whose faces were fresh in his memory from the events of that specific day. People he had a reason to expect in the parking lot after the meeting he had just attended. A baby picking up a fallen gun in a parking lot is not a person Burns had reason to expect. In season 18, Homer tells another character that he was the one who shot Burns. He says this plainly, on camera. The line is not presented as a lie, not established as comedy, not wrapped in any of the usual contextual signals that the show uses to mark something as a joke rather than a statement. Homer says he shot Burns. The other character in the scene does not react with disbelief. The moment simply happens and the story moves on. The official verdict was never reopened because of this. Nobody investigated. Nobody treated it as a confession requiring examination. Springfield had already closed the case, and in Springfield, closed cases stay closed, regardless of what new information emerges. The Marge theory has been circulating in fan communities for years. The elements supporting it are individually circumstantial but collectively form a picture worth examining. Marge had watched Burns destroy the school that her children attended, injure the family dog she loved, eliminate the cultural programs her family participated in, darken the literal sky over the town where her children played. The damage was personal in the most concrete way. It had happened to her family, not to some abstract community institution she had a civic relationship with. Burns had previously expressed an infatuation with Marge, having become fixated on her during a period when she briefly worked at the plant. He had pursued this inappropriately and against Marge's clearly stated preferences, but the infatuation had been real enough and specific enough to establish an unusual emotional dynamic in which Burns viewed Marge as someone significant to him in a way that she absolutely did not reciprocate. "Oh, it's you as spoken to Marge" by Burns makes a different kind of emotional sense than it makes spoken to Maggie. "Oh, it's you" from a man who has an obsessive attachment to someone, encountering that person in an unexpected and charged moment, is the phrase of someone whose feelings have just become complicated in a very specific direction. And then Burns was shot. And when he woke up, he did not name Marge. He looked around the room and chose someone else. He chose the person who could never be prosecuted, never be imprisoned, never face any consequence for the act that was attributed to her. He protected Marge. He took a bullet from the woman he was infatuated with, and when he had the chance to name her and chose not to, he pointed at the nearest Simpson who could serve as a substitute, which turned out to be a baby in the corner of his hospital room. The alternate ending that was produced and animated, the one where Smithers is the shooter, is typically discussed as a red herring, a possibility the show considered and then abandoned. But its existence, the fact that it was fully produced, voiced, and completed before being replaced, tells you something about how committed the production was to the Maggie answer. The answer was decided relatively late. The clues in Part 1 were not specifically designed to lead to Maggie. They were designed to maintain ambiguity while ruling out enough suspects to create narrative momentum. The answer was chosen from among the remaining possibilities, and then the resolution was constructed to fit the choice. The mystery was reverse-engineered. The answer came first, and the clues were adjusted to accommodate it. And the final shot of the episode, Maggie alone in the room after everyone has left, looking around carefully to confirm she is not being watched, and then moving her pacifier in a motion that mimics a trigger pull. The show presents this as confession, as Maggie knowing what she did and performing it privately in a moment of solitary candor. But it is also a perfect description of a baby who witnessed a shooting, who watched someone pull a trigger, and is now imitating the motion the way babies imitate every motion they observe. She is not confessing. She is remembering. She watched someone pull a trigger in that parking lot, and her one-year-old mind has processed it through the mechanism available to one-year-old minds, which is imitation. The greatest mystery the show ever created was officially solved in 1995 and has been unofficially contested ever since. The contest nobody won. The clue the victim called accidental. The recognition phrase that fits multiple suspects better than it fits a baby. The confession that was never investigated. The alternate ending that was fully produced. Springfield closed the case. The case was not solved. In Springfield, those are still two very different things. Rank 6. The Oracle with an asterisk, what the Simpsons predictions. Phenomenon is actually telling us about the show and about ourselves. There is a category of internet content that reliably generates enormous engagement regardless of how many times it has been shared before, and it has been generating that engagement continuously since at least the mid-2010s, when social media became the primary distribution mechanism for exactly this kind of material. The Simpsons predicted this. A screenshot, a clip, a moment from an episode that aired years or decades ago that contains something, a joke, a visual detail, a specific word or image that aligns with something that has subsequently happened in the real world, placed side by side with a current headline, or a photograph from a recent event, or a moment captured from the actual world. The list has grown very long. The Trump presidency, the Disney acquisition of Fox, the smartwatch, a tiger attacking a famous performer, the Higgs boson particle, the shape of the universe, video calling technology, autocorrect failures, commercial space tourism, surveillance culture, a specific collaboration between a hip-hop group and a symphony orchestra, a pandemic with specific resemblances to a fictional one the show depicted years earlier. The list accumulates new entries regularly, each one greeted with the same combination of genuine amazement, mild paranoia, and the familiar rhetorical question, how did they know? The official answer is both completely true and fundamentally insufficient. Al Jean, the executive producer who has been with the show since its earliest seasons, has given the explanation in various forms over the years. If you throw enough darts, you will eventually hit some bullseyes. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes. Each episode contains many jokes, many observations, many satirical extrapolations of trends and events and cultural trajectories. When you generate that volume of content across that many years, some percentage of it will align with future events through the basic mathematics of probability. The more darts you throw, the more bullseyes you accumulate, and the bullseyes are the ones that get remembered and shared while the misses disappear into the archive without anyone cataloging them. Producer Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its most celebrated seasons, put the supplementary point more plainly. Most of the apparent predictions are not predictions at all, but coincidences enabled by the fact that the show is old enough that history has had significant time to catch up with old jokes. The show has been running for so long that certain observations it made decades ago have eventually found their moment. This is the honest accounting. It is the official position. And it is correct as far as it goes. But a full accounting of the prediction phenomenon requires engaging with several things that the official position either does not address or cannot adequately contain. The first is the specificity problem. A meaningful portion of the supposed predictions are directionally accurate, meaning they predicted a general trend or category of event that subsequently materialized. Smartwatch. The show depicted a wrist-mounted computer-like device, and smartwatches became a real consumer product. Video calling. The show depicted video communication technology, and FaceTime and Zoom became ubiquitous. These are trend predictions, meaning the show observed a trajectory that technology was already on and extrapolated what it might produce. The writers did not need to know the future to make these observations. They needed to understand where the present was heading, which a group of well-educated, technologically literate observers absolutely could do. But a different subset of the supposed predictions are not merely directionally accurate. They are specifically accurate in ways that trend extrapolation cannot fully account for. The Trump prediction did not say a celebrity might become president. It said Trump specifically by name in the White House. It depicted him descending an escalator in a sequence whose visual composition was later echoed in remarkable detail by the announcement Trump made when he launched his 2016 campaign. The show did not just predict the category of event. It predicted the specific person and, in a rough way, the specific staging of the moment when that event became public. The Siegfried and Roy prediction, which depicted a white tiger attacking a performer, corresponds to the 2003 incident in which Roy Horn was critically injured during a performance when a white tiger belonging to the act attacked him on stage. The show did not predict that exotic animals are sometimes dangerous, which would be a negligible prediction. The show depicted a specific type of animal, a white tiger, attacking a specific type of performer in a manner closely resembling what actually happened. The 2024 Cypress Hill and London Symphony Orchestra performance is perhaps the most statistically difficult to explain away. In 1996, the show made a joke about this specific collaboration, depicting Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra. 28 years later, the collaboration happened at the Royal Albert Hall, as a deliberate and celebrated event. The gap between the joke and the reality is almost 3 decades. The specificity of the match, two extremely specific named entities, Cypress Hill and the London Symphony Orchestra, in a collaborative performance, is precise enough that the dart-throwing explanation requires the dart to have been thrown with unusual precision for a random hit. The writing staff of The Simpsons has consistently been among the most educated in television. Multiple writers have held degrees from elite institutions in fields including mathematics, political science, economics, computer science, and the physical sciences. This is not a group assembled to produce entertaining content through casual observation. This is a group of people with deep analytical training who have spent their careers studying American culture and American institutions and understanding how they work, where they are going, and what happens when the pressures on them reach their logical conclusions. These writers did not predict Trump by throwing a random dart. They predicted Trump by doing what highly educated analysts of American culture do. They observed the trajectory that celebrity politics and the commodification of political identity were already on. They identified Trump as the most prominent and aggressive example of the phenomenon, and they drew the line forward to its conclusion. 16 years before it happened. This is sophisticated analysis, not prophecy. But the distance between sophisticated analysis and prophecy, when the analysis turns out to be correct with the specificity of the Trump prediction, is smaller than it appears. Now, the second thing the official position does not fully address, the cultural influence problem. There is a version of the prediction phenomenon that is not about the show forecasting the future at all. It is about the show shaping the future through the mechanism of cultural influence. The Simpsons is not just a television program, it is infrastructure. It has been operating for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its imagery has become part of the shared visual vocabulary of multiple generations. Its observations about American life have become the lens through which those generations understand certain aspects of their own culture. When the show makes a joke about a politician or a corporation or a cultural tendency, that joke does not stay inside the show. It enters the cultural bloodstream, is shared and quoted and referenced, becomes a piece of common shorthand, shapes the associations that millions of people carry. When the show made the Trump joke in 2000, that joke became something millions of people knew about. It circulated. It was referenced in conversations. For 15 years before the election, the idea of Trump as president existed in the cultural imagination not just as something a political analyst might consider, but as something that felt familiar in the specific way that Simpsons moments feel familiar, because it had been part of a joke people had seen and shared and discussed. The show did not predict the Trump presidency. The show helped make the Trump presidency feel imaginable. And things that feel imaginable are more likely to happen than things that feel unimaginable, because imagination is one of the forces that shapes what kinds of actions people take and what kinds of outcomes they accept. This is the mechanism by which the show's predictions become partly self-fulfilling. By depicting a future scenario with enough specificity and cultural reach, the show contributes to the process by which that scenario comes to be seen as possible, familiar, perhaps inevitable. And once something is seen as possible and familiar, the path from imagination to reality shortens. Springfield does not reflect America. America becomes Springfield. The show held up a mirror, and the audience stared into it long enough that we started to resemble what we saw. The corrupt billionaire who manipulates the town's resources while everyone watches and nobody effectively resists. The incompetent government apparatus that provides the appearance of institutional oversight without the substance, the population too entertained and too comfortable to interrogate the mechanics of their own circumstances. The endless cycle of disaster followed by forgetting, followed by the same disaster again. These were jokes. They were exaggerations. They were the satirical extremes of tendencies that the writers observed in American life and amplified for comic effect. And then they stopped being exaggerations. The show was not predicting the future. The show was diagnosing the present in terms precise enough that, eventually, the present caught up with the diagnosis. The third element of the prediction phenomenon that the official position does not fully account for is the archive problem. The show has made thousands of jokes that did not come true. Jokes about jetpacks, about permanent Martian colonies, about specific political outcomes that went in different directions, about technological developments that materialized differently than the show imagined. These failed predictions vastly outnumber the successful ones. They exist in the archive, they are findable, but they are not being shared on social media. They are not being positioned alongside current headlines in side-by-side comparison images. Nobody is building a theory about The Simpsons' prophetic limitations based on the jokes that missed. Confirmation bias is not just a casual cognitive error. It is a systematic filter that processes an enormous body of content and surfaces only the results that fit the predetermined conclusion. The Simpsons' predictions are real. Many of them are coincidences. Some are the result of sophisticated trend analysis. A small number are genuinely difficult to explain, and the reason they feel like prophecy is not that the show is oracular. The reason they feel like prophecy is that the internet functions as the world's most effective confirmation bias machine, filtering 800 episodes through the narrow aperture of cases where the joke turned out to match the headline, and presenting that filtered result as if it were the complete picture. But there is a final observation that pulls the conversation back towards something genuine and strange. Even knowing all of this, even understanding the statistical explanation and the confirmation bias explanation and the cultural influence mechanism and the role of sophisticated analysis in generating apparently predictive content, even holding all of those frameworks simultaneously, Some of the specific matches between the show's jokes and the actual world are hard to look at without a certain unease. 28 years between the Cypress Hill and LSO joke and the actual Cypress Hill and LSO concert. 16 years between the Trump presidency joke and the actual Trump presidency. A visual match between a fictional animated sequence and the actual staging of a real-world announcement. The frameworks help. The frameworks are correct. The frameworks do not fully dissolve the unease. The show has been running long enough, and has been right about enough specific things in specific ways, that even the people who made it have admitted to occasionally wondering whether they know something they should not. Springfield is real enough that America grew into it. The predictions are true enough that the show's creators give them a pause they do not fully explain. And somewhere in the archive, in an episode that has not found its headline yet, is probably a joke that will look, 15 or 20 years from now, exactly like a prediction. Rank 5. The woman who was erased, and the conspiracy that built Homer Simpson into exactly who Burns needed him to be. The Simpsons is, among many other things, a show about what children lose when the adults in their lives fail them. Homer's failures as a parent, the carelessness and the inattention and the occasional genuine harm, are the source of enormous amounts of the show's comedy. The show has always been honest about Homer's limitations while simultaneously insisting on the depth of his love for his family. And the combination of those two things, loving someone badly, being fundamentally well-intentioned and fundamentally inadequate at the same time, is one of the most human things the show captures. But the most interesting question the show has ever raised about Homer's parenting is not about his failures. It is about his father's. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was a settled fact. She had died when Homer was young. Abe Simpson had told him so. There was a grave. Homer had mourned. The grief was old and integrated, part of the foundational texture of who Homer was, informing the specific emotional patterns, the neediness and the fear of abandonment and the desperate hunger for approval that defined his adult personality. In Season 7, the episode Mother Simpson revealed that everything Abe had told Homer about his mother's death was a lie. She was alive. She had been alive throughout Homer's entire childhood and adolescence and adulthood. The grave Abe showed him belonged to Walt Whitman. His father had been using the burial site of one of America's most significant poets as a stand-in for a woman who was not in fact dead, but was a fugitive living under various identities across the country. The revelation of Mona Simpson's survival is the emotional center of one of the most affecting episodes the show has produced. But the more important question is not where she had been. The more important question is why she had gone there in the first place. The story goes back to 1969. And it begins not with crime or radicalism or anything particularly dramatic. It begins with a housewife in Springfield. Mona Simpson was married to Abe, was raising a young son named Homer, and was living the quiet domestic life that the post-war American middle class had settled into. The world outside was loud and troubled and full of the specific energies of the late 1960s, the civil rights movement and the counterculture, and the protests against Vietnam. But those energies existed at a distance from Mona's daily life, which was defined by the smaller and more immediate rhythms of domesticity. And then, something shifted. The show depicts it with the gentle comedy it applies to depicting historical radicalism, because The Simpsons has always been more comfortable with big ideas when they are lightly held, but the underlying content is serious. Mona was politicized. She began to pay attention to what was happening around her in ways she had not before. She connected with a group of activists and allowed those connections to pull her into a kind of engagement with the world that her previous life had not included. The group targeted a specific facility, a biological weapons laboratory owned by Charles Montgomery Burns. Let the magnitude of that settle for a moment, in the context of everything we know about Burns. Burns owns a nuclear power plant that has 342 safety violations and has been contaminating the town's environment for decades. That is the version of Burns most people think of when they think of his impact on Springfield. But Burns also, at least as of 1969, owned a germ warfare facility, a laboratory operating in the town of Springfield, within the community where families lived and children went to school and people went about their ordinary daily lives, producing weaponized pathogens, biological weapons, in Springfield. Operated by the same man who would later operate the nuclear power plant in Springfield. the same man whose facilities Homer would spend his entire adult working life employed by. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory. They deployed what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, a device designed to destroy or neutralize the biological agent stored at the facility. The raid succeeded. The pathogens were eliminated. The facility was compromised. And during the escape, Mona made the mistake that changed everything. Someone was knocked down in the chaos of the raid and the escape. Mona stopped to help them. She looked at the person on the ground and made the decision that you make when you are fundamentally someone who helps people who are down. She helped them. The person she stopped to help was Burns. He saw her face. He recognized her. And from that moment, Mona Simpson was a federal fugitive, reported by Burns to the FBI, with a warrant open and active and her name in the system. She could not go home. She could not contact Abe or Homer without leading the authorities to them or placing them in danger. She had to disappear. She had to become someone else, to move, to stay ahead of whatever institutional attention Burns's report had set in motion. She kissed Homer goodbye in the dark while he slept, which means Homer's last conscious memory of his mother was of a world that still contained her normally, and his first waking reality was one in which she was simply gone. No explanation, no goodbye, no child's understanding of what had happened and why, just absence where there had been presence. Abe chose to tell Homer she was dead. Whatever his reasoning, however protective the intention, the result was that Homer grew up not knowing his mother had been taken from him by the man he would eventually work for. He grew up believing he was the kind of child a mother would rather not return to. He built his entire personality around an emotional wound, whose true source was systematically hidden from him. Burns pursued Mona for decades. This is the detail that transforms the story from a personal tragedy into something that looks more like a deliberate campaign. The FBI investigation might have become inactive over time, as investigations into 30-year-old protest-era activities sometimes do. But Burns did not let it become inactive. He had personal reasons to maintain the pressure. A woman had destroyed his biological weapons laboratory. She had done it successfully and escaped. She had escaped because he had been on the ground when she could have been caught, which meant he experienced the escape as something personal, a direct consequence of his own incapacity at that specific moment. When Mona returned to Springfield in Season 7, believing Homer to be dead, Burns spotted her through a taxi window and immediately called the authorities. Decades had passed. He recognized her anyway. The FBI was at the Simpson house. Mona had to run again. Homer had to say goodbye to his mother for the second time in his life. This time he knew who had forced her out. He understood the connection that had been hidden from him since childhood. The man who had made his mother a fugitive, the man who had pursued her across decades and was still pursuing her now, was the man who signed Homer's paychecks. His employer, the person whose continued institutional goodwill was the foundation of Homer's economic stability, the stability that protected his family, the stability that Homer had been clinging to with the specific desperation of someone who grew up with nothing stable to hold on to. Homer did not confront Burns. He did not quit. He did not seem to fully process, in any way that produced lasting behavioral change, the connection between the man who destroyed his family and the man who employed him. He returned to work. The cycle continued. And this is not played as simple obliviousness, though Homer's cognitive limitations are certainly a factor. It is played as something deeper and more structural. Homer is not capable of making the kind of sustained, analytical, emotionally weighted connection that would allow him to look at Burns clearly and understand the full shape of what Burns has done to him and his family. His ability to perform that kind of cognitive and emotional work was compromised before it ever fully developed by the same environment and the same employer and the same system that benefits most from his inability to perform it. Burns engineered Homer. That is the most precise way to describe what the accumulation of events amounts to. By driving Mona away when Homer was very young, Burns created the conditions for Homer's specific emotional damage: the abandonment wound, the need for approval, the terror of being left, the willingness to accept degrading treatment rather than risk losing the stability he has managed to construct around himself. By maintaining his hold over Abe through the deal that Abe eventually made in exchange for silence about one of Burns's crimes, Burns ensured that Homer would have employment at the plant regardless of his performance, locking Homer into the orbit of the institution that had already destroyed his family. By operating a plant that leaked radiation into the environment throughout Homer's entire life, Burns ensured that Homer's cognitive function would remain compromised in ways that served Burns's interest in an uninvestigative, compliant workforce. By maintaining the psychological conditions through Homer's work environment and his dependency on it, in which Homer could never afford the clarity required to see the full picture, Burns ensured that the one person in Springfield with the most direct personal grievance against him would remain permanently incapable of acting on it. Homer is not a victim of incidental circumstance. Homer is a specifically and systematically produced outcome. Burns did not stumble into having the perfect employee in Homer Simpson. Burns built the perfect employee through a sequence of choices that began decades before Homer ever walked through the plant's doors. The show proves what Homer could have been in the episode where the crayon is removed from his brain. Without the cognitive limitation, Homer is articulate, perceptive, capable of analysis, capable of sustained intellectual engagement with the world around him. He is not the person Burns needs him to be. He is a threat to the comfortable arrangement that Burns's entire empire depends on. And when the clarity became unbearable, when seeing the world accurately meant seeing his own situation with a precision he was not equipped to survive, Homer chose to put the crayon back. He chose the fog. But the choice was rigged. The entire architecture of Homer's life had been constructed by someone else specifically to make the fog more comfortable than the light. Mona died in a later season. The scene is among the quietest and most honest things the show has ever produced. Homer at her bedside, his hand in hers. The years between them pressing down on both of them. All the years that Burns stole, all the years Abe hid, all the years Homer spent not knowing and not being able to know. No punchline. No reset. Just a man and his mother, and the weight of what was done to them both by one man's grudge and one town's inability to hold that man accountable for anything. 3 generations of the Simpson family. One man's decision to make Mona a fugitive. Everything that followed. Burns won. As Burns always wins? In Springfield? Because in Springfield, the man with the resources writes the outcome, and the people with the grievances cannot organize their understanding of their own situation clearly enough to challenge him. Homer stands at the center of all of it, too damaged to see the full shape of the thing, too dependent to leave it, returning to the plant each morning to protect a town from a facility that is poisoning that town, employed by the man who took his mother, living on the electricity generated by the machine that compromised everything. He gets up every day and goes back. Because that is what Homer does. Because that is what Homer was built to do. Rank 4. The Architecture of Immortality. How Mr. Burns has survived long enough to remember the Spanish-American War. Charles Montgomery Burns is impossible. This is not a casual observation. It is a categorical statement about a character who, within the established internal reality of the Simpsons universe, could not exist by any biological standard that applies to ordinary human beings. Burns should be dead. Burns should have been dead for decades, possibly for more than half a century. The specific combination of factors required to produce a Burns who is still operational in the current day represents such an extreme departure from normal biological reality that the show itself has spent years building an elaborate framework to explain why he is still here. Understanding that framework is one of the most interesting exercises the show invites. Let us begin with the age question, which the show has always handled through strategic ambiguity. Burns's exact birth year is never stated definitively. The floating timeline that prevents any character in Springfield from having a fixed birth year affects Burns the same way it affects Homer and Marge, in the sense that the show will not commit to a specific number. But Burns's references to his own personal history are specific enough and reach back far enough that the age question answers itself through accumulation. Burns has personal memories of events from before the turn of the 20th century. He speaks of these not as history he studied or stories he was told, but as things he experienced. He references the late 1800s with the comfortable familiarity of someone reaching back into the personal archive of their own life. He served in World War II. For the most conservative possible reading of this, assuming he served as a young man, Burns would have been born somewhere between 1920 and 1926. This would make him a centenarian by the current day, which is unusual but not biologically impossible. But his memories and references do not allow for that conservative reading. He attended Yale, He describes working relationships and personal encounters that predate the First World War. He knew Howard Hughes, who was born in 1905, as a peer rather than an elder. He references the Gilded Age with the specific intimacy of someone who was present for it as a conscious adult. His family history, which the show establishes as one of the oldest and most continuously powerful lineages in American life, suggests a birth date significantly earlier than the early 1920s. He has explicitly referenced the Spanish-American War, which took place in 1898, in a way that carries the weight of personal memory. The most honest reading of the accumulated evidence places Burns's birth somewhere in the 1880s. The most generous reading toward biological plausibility places it in the late 1890s. Either way, he is at minimum 120 years old, more likely older, and he functions. This is the critical point. His body is frail, his physical strength negligible, the infrastructure of his movement through the world requiring assistance and accommodation, and the constant management of a staff who understand how delicate his physical form is. But his mind is intact. His strategic intelligence is operational. His ability to design and execute complex schemes that require sustained attention, accurate modeling of other people's behavior, and the manipulation of institutions and individuals over extended time periods, none of this has diminished in any visible way. Burns does not just exist. Burns operates at the level of cognitive function that has made him the most powerful person in Springfield for a very long time. How? The Springfield Files provides the most direct canonical explanation available in the show's own established facts. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment at the power plant. The show establishes this as a recurring scheduled event in his life, a non-negotiable fixture of his calendar, something that if missed even once would have immediate and fatal consequences. The treatment is so intensive in its chemical and radiological content that it causes Burns's entire body to glow. Not a figure of speech, not a metaphor for the treatment's power. He literally emits visible green light after each session, glowing in the dark the way objects contaminated with radioactive material can glow in certain circumstances. The glow fades over the following week as the treatment's effects are metabolized or depleted. As it approaches zero, Burns approaches death. The next treatment restores him, and the cycle begins again. His life is maintained on a weekly cycle. The margin for error is precisely zero. Miss one treatment, and whatever process the treatment is managing collapses, and Burns dies. He is being kept alive artificially, not in the limited sense in which that phrase is sometimes used to describe aggressive medical intervention in a terminal patient. In the more fundamental sense that Burns's biological processes are no longer capable of sustaining themselves without external input. His body has lost the ability to run itself. It requires weekly servicing, like a machine that cannot maintain its own function. The treatment involves radiation. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, whose plant has been leaking radiation into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled exposure to radiation in order to continue living. Burns is not simply adjacent to the thing that has damaged his town. Burns is powered by it. The same energy that has been warping the biology of everyone around him is, in his case, specifically managed and directed to maintain his own biological equilibrium. The Three Stooges syndrome episode elaborates this further. A doctor examines Burns, performs comprehensive testing, and reports back with findings that represent the medical equivalent of a grand, unified theory of everything wrong with one human being. Burns has every disease known to medical science, simultaneously. All of them present in his body at the same time, existing in a state of perfect mutual cancellation. Each disease is preventing every other disease from advancing far enough to be lethal, because they are all blocked by each other, all trying to claim the same physiological space at once, and none of them able to make progress against the competition. The doctor uses the Three Stooges analogy. 3 people trying to fit through a door simultaneously cannot fit, and each one's attempt to get through blocks the other 2. Burns's diseases are all attempting to kill him simultaneously, and because they are all attempting this simultaneously, none of them can succeed. The conclusion is that Burns is the sickest person in the country and also, paradoxically, functionally indestructible by any conventional biological standard. The scene is comedy. The absurdity of the diagnosis is the joke. But under the radiation framework, there is a logic beneath the comedy. The weekly treatments do not cure Burns's diseases. They cannot cure them, because the diseases are not the primary problem. The diseases are symptoms of a body that has been so thoroughly and fundamentally compromised by however many decades of exposure to the material his plant processes that it can no longer maintain normal health. The diseases are what happens when a biological system that has been radically altered by external forces tries to compensate. The compensation produces pathological processes in every system simultaneously. The weekly treatments manage this. They adjust the balance. They keep the various pathological processes from advancing beyond the equilibrium point where they are mutually blocking each other. They function, to use an analogy that fits the plant that provides them, like the control rods in a nuclear reactor, not eliminating the reaction, but preventing it from proceeding beyond the threshold of catastrophic failure. Remove the control rods, and the reactor runs away. Miss the weekly treatment and the disease equilibrium collapses. In either case, the result is the same. Everything that was being managed ceases to be managed, and the system fails completely. Smithers is the person responsible for making sure this never happens. Smithers manages Burns's schedule. He ensures that the weekly treatment happens on time, that no competing obligation is allowed to displace it, that Burns's physical condition is monitored with sufficient attention, that any variation from the baseline is noticed and addressed. He has an understanding of Burns's medical protocol that is, within the show, unique to him. He is the only person who knows all of the details of what keeping Burns alive requires. The devotion that Smithers displays toward Burns is usually interpreted as the product of an intense personal attachment, unrequited and one-sided, the loyalty of a man who has made his employer the center of his emotional world. This interpretation is true, as far as it goes, but it is incomplete without the other element. Smithers knows that his absence would kill Burns. He knows, with specificity, that if he were to leave his position, if he were to stop managing the treatment schedule, if he were to be unavailable on the day the dose is due, Burns would die within a week. This knowledge is part of the texture of their relationship in a way that neither of them may fully articulate, but that both of them understand. Smithers's devotion is sustained by more than feeling. It is sustained by the specific weight of knowing that his continued presence is the mechanism that keeps another person alive. This is not the same thing as freely chosen love. It is not exactly coercion either. It is a form of moral capture, where leaving has been made effectively impossible by the knowledge of what leaving would produce. Now consider the Burns dynasty in the longer historical view. The show establishes that the Burns family's wealth and influence predate Burns himself by a significant margin. This is not simply old money in the sense of wealth that has been maintained through careful investment and conventional generational succession. This is wealth of a different kind, wealth that appears to have been in continuous active management and expansion for a period that spans well beyond any individual's normal lifespan. If the current Burns has required artificial intervention to survive beyond his natural span, and the show establishes clearly that he has, the question becomes, what mechanisms sustained the Burns dynasty before the specific technologies that currently keep him alive were available? Before nuclear medicine, before the pharmaceutical infrastructure that produces his weekly treatments, before the specific combination of radiation therapy and chemical intervention that the show depicts as the mechanism of his survival, what kept the Burns dynasty continuous and operational across the period when none of those tools existed? The show does not answer this question. It does not even raise it explicitly. It simply presents the Burns family as ancient and powerful without providing the mechanism that allowed that continuity to be maintained. The gap is open. It sits in the show's history as an implicit suggestion that the methods have changed, but the practice of extending the Burns patriarch's operational lifespan is not new. What the show does do is establish that Burns has had an unusually direct and sustained engagement with death over the course of his visible history. He has been shot, hospitalized extensively, fallen, been attacked, been poisoned, been abandoned, and each time he does not survive through the kind of cartoon resilience that Homer displays. He survives through infrastructure, through wealth, through the specific combination of resources and institutional relationships and retained expertise that he has spent a very long time building specifically to ensure that no matter what happens to his physical form, there will be something standing by capable of putting it back together. Homer's immortality in the show is the immortality of narrative necessity. The story cannot kill Homer because Homer is the protagonist and the show needs him to continue. Burns's immortality is something different. It is the immortality of sufficient resources applied to the specific problem of keeping one person alive regardless of what biology would otherwise do to them. Every dollar Burns has ever spent, every institution he has ever corrupted, every political relationship he has ever maintained, every physician he has ever retained, all of it traces back to the same foundational purpose, ensuring that the system continues to run, that the treatments continue to happen on schedule, that the diseases remain in their equilibrium, that Burns remains operational. Because if Burns dies, everything that depends on Burns dies with him. The empire requires the emperor, and the emperor, through decades of careful engineering, has made himself too expensive to die. Springfield will keep paying the bill. Rank 3. The town that voted to make truth illegal. What the principal and the pauper is actually telling us. In September 1997, The Simpsons aired an episode that immediately generated more sustained negative reaction from its fan base than almost anything the show had produced before or since. The backlash was immediate, intense, and has not fully subsided in the nearly 3 decades since the episode aired. It is consistently cited in discussions of the show's perceived decline, used as evidence that the writers stopped caring about internal consistency, pointed to as the moment the show made a choice so fundamentally wrong that it broke something essential in the relationship between the series and its audience. The episode is called The Principal and the Pauper, and the fans who hate it are, in a specific and important sense, completely correct that it broke something. They are wrong about what was broken. Principal Seymour Skinner has been part of Springfield's texture from near the beginning of the show. He is the principal of Springfield Elementary, the authority figure against whom Bart's rebellious energy is most consistently directed. The military-inflected administrator who runs the school with a combination of genuine dedication and the specific neurotic energy of someone who has never quite escaped his mother's expectations. His relationship with Agnes Skinner, his demanding and rarely satisfied mother, has been a rich source of comedy across many seasons. His relationship with Bart has been one of the show's most enduring comedic dynamics. His personality, the blend of rigidity and suppressed yearning and occasional genuine decency, has made him a reliable and well-drawn supporting character. The Principal and the Pauper begins with Springfield Elementary celebrating Principal Skinner's 20th anniversary of service. The ceremony is warm, the community is present and appreciative, and the moment has the texture of something settled and right. And then a stranger walks in. He identifies himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner. A United States Army veteran, a Vietnam prisoner of war who survived captivity and eventually made his way home to discover that while he was gone, someone else had been living his life. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner for 20 years is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a street kid from the wrong circumstances, a petty criminal with no direction who was drafted into military service and placed into the same unit as the real Seymour Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt the specific guilt of someone who believes, rightly or wrongly, that he could have done something to prevent what happened. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to his mother, Agnes. When he arrived, Agnes did what grief sometimes requires a person to do. She saw what she needed to see. She needed her son to have come home. She looked at Tamzarian and decided he was her son. And Tamzarian, who had never had a family, never had a home, never had an identity he wanted to keep, made the choice that the moment offered him. He became Seymour Skinner. He stepped into the name and the life and the complicated relationship with the demanding mother, and he maintained that identity for 20 years with enough consistency that nobody questioned it, until the real Skinner came through the door. What follows is the sequence that made the episode famous and infamous simultaneously. Springfield holds a meeting to address what has been revealed. The real Skinner is there. Tamzarian is there. The evidence is unambiguous. Everyone in the room knows that the person they have trusted as their school principal, the person who has been part of the community fabric for 2 decades, has been living inside an identity that was not his. They vote. not on how to proceed legally, not on how to restore the real Skinner's rights, not on how to handle the disclosure. They vote on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The vote is unanimous. They choose Tamzarian. They choose the lie. They choose the comfortable, familiar, established fiction over the real man who has arrived with proof that the fiction is what it is. Judge Snyder formalizes the decision with a legal decree. Armin Tamzarian is the real Seymour Skinner, by order of the court. The actual Seymour Skinner, the veteran who survived captivity and came home to find his life occupied by someone else, is tied to a railroad car and expelled from the town. And the judge adds one more provision, delivered as a punchline but entirely consistent with the logic of everything that has just happened. It is now illegal to ever mention any of this again, under penalty of torture. The fans hated this. The critical response was fierce. Harry Shearer, who voices both Skinner and Burns among many other characters, stated his displeasure with the storyline. The consensus among engaged viewers was that the episode had retroactively undermined one of the show's most reliable characters, destroying 20 years of established canon for the sake of a gag that was not worth the cost. But here is the thing the fans were not quite saying, or were saying without full articulation. The episode did not break The Simpsons. The episode described how The Simpsons works. It showed the machinery that had always been running underneath the surface, the mechanism that allows a town to absorb impossible events and return to normal, to survive catastrophes and reset, to live inside contradictions without being destroyed by them. Springfield has always operated this way. The show has established this across hundreds of episodes. The three-eyed fish in the river received no follow-up investigation. The glowing billionaire in the woods was attributed to aliens rather than radiation. The dome that sealed the entire town in the movie was apparently absorbed into community life without generating any lasting civic response. The disasters that should permanently alter things, the catastrophes that should accumulate into an undeniable picture of what is wrong with Springfield, they do not accumulate. They happen, and then they are gone, replaced by a fresh normal that does not carry the scars of what preceded it. This is what the fans have been calling lazy writing or inconsistency or the writers not caring about continuity. But the Principal and the Pauper shows you it is something else entirely. It shows you the vote. Every other time Springfield forgets something, the forgetting happens between episodes, in the invisible space between the end of one story and the beginning of the next. The audience absorbs the reset without examining it because the reset is not depicted. It simply occurs and the show continues as if the previous events had not happened, and the audience accepts this because they have been trained to accept it by decades of the same dynamic. The Principal and the Pauper was the one time the show chose to show the reset happening in real time. To let the audience watch the vote, watch the decree, watch the physical expulsion of inconvenient truth from the community that had grown comfortable with its absence. And the audience experienced this as a betrayal, because it was a betrayal. It was the show betraying the audience's comfortable acceptance of the reset by making the mechanism of the reset visible. By forcing the audience to watch Springfield actively choose the lie, actively suppress the real, actively remove from its midst the person who embodied the truth, and formalize the lie with legal authority. The fans who hated the episode were reacting to the discomfort of recognition. The show was showing them something true about itself, something true about Springfield, something true about how communities actually function when the established order of things is threatened by inconvenient reality. Communities do not welcome inconvenient truth. Communities have strong mechanisms for managing, suppressing, and ultimately expelling the things that threaten their settled understanding of themselves. A small town in the real world discovers that a beloved community figure has been living under a false identity for decades. How does that town typically respond? In some cases, with the diligence that the truth requires. In others, with the social pressure to absorb the disruption as quietly as possible, to let the community's existing investment in the person override the claim that the person is not who they said they were. Springfield performed this process explicitly, with a vote, with a decree, with a railroad car. The real Seymour Skinner was expelled because Seymour Skinner was inconvenient. He arrived with truth, and Springfield did not need truth. Springfield needed Principal Skinner to be the person it had always understood him to be, because Tamzarian's 20 years of community service were real, the relationships were real, the institutional role was real, And asking the community to discard all of that in favor of the correct account of who this person was required a cognitive and emotional effort that Springfield had decided, collectively, not to make. Springfield chose Tamzarian for the same reason it chose to see Burns's medical treatment as an alien sighting rather than evidence of radiation exposure. For the same reason it has never followed up on the three-eyed fish. For the same reason Homer's coma left him with permanent brain damage, and the family found this funny rather than alarming. For the same reason that 342 safety violations at the plant were documented and then unfixed. Springfield does not choose comfortable lies because it is stupid. Springfield chooses comfortable lies because the uncomfortable truths, if acknowledged and followed to their logical implications, would require confronting things that the community cannot afford to confront without destroying the basic structure of the life it has built. If they followed the three-eyed fish to its source, they would have to address the power plant. Addressing the power plant would mean challenging Burns. Challenging Burns would mean risking the economic stability of a community that depends entirely on the plant for its electricity and for a significant portion of its employment. The economic stability is the foundation of everything else. Pull that and the whole structure falls. So they look away from the fish, they look away from the violations, they look away from the man who woke up from surgery with permanent brain damage and found this funny. And when the real Seymour Skinner comes to town with proof that their principal is a fraud, they tie him to a railroad car and send him away because the discomfort of acknowledging his truth is less manageable than the discomfort of enforcing his exile. The Principal and the Pauper is the most important episode The Simpsons has ever produced. Not because it is the best. It may not even be in the top 100 best. It is important because it is the only episode that shows you the infrastructure of Springfield's denial. The mechanism by which the impossible is made livable. The social technology that allows a town full of mutants to believe they are normal, a man in a coma to believe he is awake, a community built on lies to punish anyone who insists on telling the truth. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's last honest man. He came home to find his life occupied by someone else. He came to his own town with proof. He stood in front of the community that had been his community, or should have been, and presented them with a reality that they had the option to acknowledge. And they chose not to. He is still out there somewhere, tied to his railroad car, exiled from his own name, the only person in Springfield who knew the truth about who was living inside his life, who insisted on that truth, and who paid for the insistence in exactly the way Springfield has always made people pay for it, with removal. Armin Tamzarian is still in the school. Agnes Skinner is still calling him Seymour. The community is still operating as if the vote resolved anything other than the question of which version of reality Springfield prefers. And in Springfield, the preferred version of reality is the only version that is allowed to exist. Rank 2. Springfield as a contamination zone, the nuclear mutation. Theory that explains every impossible thing about this town. There is a theory about The Simpsons that begins with a three-eyed fish and ends with the explanation for everything. Every impossible thing about Springfield. Every character who should not be able to survive what they survive. Every community that should not be able to forget what it forgets. Every biological impossibility staring at you from every yellow face on every episode for 36 years. The theory is this. The Springfield nuclear power plant is poisoning everyone who lives there and has been doing so since before the show began, and the effects of that poisoning are visible in every aspect of the town's biology, behavior, and community psychology. Not metaphorically, physically, as a documented, ongoing, and thoroughly evidenced process. Let us begin with what is established as fact within the show's internal reality, because the factual baseline is already extraordinary. The plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It is the primary electrical power source for Springfield and has been throughout the show's run. It was owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns from before the events of the series begin, and it had, by the time of the episode that documented them, accumulated 342 violations of basic safety standards. 342. The estimated cost to bring the plant into compliance with the requirements that those violations represented was $56 million. Burns declined to spend it. He had the resources. His personal wealth dwarfs that figure comfortably. He declined because the decision to spend it would require acknowledging that the violations existed and acknowledging that the violations existed would open the question of what those violations had already done to the community living in proximity to the facility. That question was the question Burns could not afford to answer publicly. The violations are not regulatory abstractions. They are physical facts with physical consequences. Radioactive waste was being dumped into bodies of water that the community used and that fed into the broader water supply. Radioactive material was being deposited at public playgrounds where children spent their time, which is one of the most direct and specific routes for radiological exposure to a developing population. Plutonium was present as a casual desk accessory in someone's workspace. Cracked cooling towers were sealed with the kind of improvised patch that belongs on a household plumbing problem, not a nuclear reactor. Rodents with visible bioluminescence, creatures so contaminated that they emit light, were present in the facility's infrastructure. And human skeletons were found in the basement, unidentified, unexplained, and in the context of an operating nuclear facility, unexamined. The safety function of the plant, the role responsible for monitoring this facility and ensuring that its operations did not produce the catastrophic consequences that the violations were already producing, was filled by Homer Simpson, a man the show's own creator has stated has an IQ of 55. A man with a foreign object lodged in his brain that physically reduced his cognitive function below its natural level. A man who has fallen asleep during active reactor alerts, who caused a nuclear incident by introducing a food item into the reactor core to see what would happen, who has consistently demonstrated every characteristic of someone who should not be responsible for monitoring a hazardous industrial facility of any kind, let alone a nuclear one. This is the institutional arrangement that has been in place for Homer's entire adult working life. The first visible consequence appears in the second season of the show. A fish is caught in a river near the power plant. The fish has 3 eyes. Not an animation error, not a stylized depiction of a normal fish. A canonical, plot-significant fish with 3 distinct eyes, pulled from water that receives the runoff of a facility with 342 safety violations. The fish becomes a news story within the show. A gubernatorial candidate uses it as evidence of environmental contamination. Burns is compelled to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate that it is safe, which is not the same as demonstrating that it is not a product of radioactive contamination, but in Springfield this distinction is not pressed. After the fish episode, the question that should dominate the community conversation is never asked. Not by any character, not in any episode, not in any context across the remaining seasons. The question is simple. If the fish in the water have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people who drink that water? The silence around that question is the loudest thing in Springfield. Now look at the residents themselves, carefully, and without the desensitization that comes from watching hundreds of hours of this show. 4 fingers on each hand. This is universal among Springfield residents, not a stylistic choice that applies inconsistently. Every Springfield resident, every single person who lives within the town, has 4 fingers instead of 5. This is true of Homer, of Marge, of their children, of Ned Flanders, of Chief Wiggum, of every background character in every scene set in Springfield. Yellow skin. Every Springfield resident has the same distinctively yellow skin tone that does not correspond to any natural human skin color. Not the yellow of jaundice, which is a symptom of liver or bile duct dysfunction. A consistent, permanent yellow that every resident maintains continuously throughout their entire lives. Overbites. Eyes that protrude from their sockets in ways that differ from standard anatomy. Unusual cranial morphology. Hair that maintains structural configurations without any product or physical support, forming and holding shapes that defy standard physics. These are not art-style choices that the show applies uniformly across all characters. The show does not apply them uniformly. Guest characters, visitors, people from outside Springfield, people who exist within the show's universe but have their lives elsewhere, are consistently drawn with different proportions. Their eyes sit differently in their faces. Their hands have 5 fingers. Their features are arranged in ways that more closely approximate actual human anatomy. The visual line between people who live inside Springfield and people who do not is drawn consistently and specifically at the boundary of the town. People inside look like Simpsons characters. People outside look like people. This is the most important visual evidence for the mutation theory because it directly contradicts the art style explanation. If the distinctive look of the characters were purely a stylistic choice applied consistently to animate the show's world, it would apply to every character in the show's universe. It does not. It applies specifically to people who live in Springfield. The animals confirm it. The Simpson family dog, Santa's little helper, has the same bulging eyes as his owners. The show's visual treatment of animals native to Springfield differs from animals depicted in contexts outside of the town. Blinky the fish, with 3 eyes, is not a background character in a universe where all fish are strange. Blinky is an anomaly within a broader world where fish are normal, and his 3 eyes are the show's explicit statement about what the plant's contamination is doing to living organisms in Springfield's ecosystem. The show tells you directly that the radiation is producing mutations in the local wildlife. And then it expects the audience to accept that those same radiation levels have had no effect on the humans drinking from the same water and breathing the same air. In the Simpsons movie, the contamination can no longer be contained within the show's usual framework of acknowledged but unaddressed problems. The pollution has reached a level so severe that the Environmental Protection Agency, operating as a real federal agency within the story, determines that Springfield must be physically contained. A glass dome is deployed over the entire town. The justification is that Springfield's pollution has become an existential threat to the surrounding environment that requires physical containment to prevent further spread. The United States government sealed Springfield because Springfield had become too contaminated to be permitted to exist as a normal part of the American landscape without endangering everything around it. And the people inside the dome when it goes up are all the people who have been living inside the contamination zone for their entire lives. Burns knows this. The show establishes his knowledge across multiple episodes, each one adding another layer to the picture of a man who understands precisely what he is doing and has chosen to continue doing it for reasons that make complete sense from within his specific value system. Burns undergoes weekly radiation treatments, as described in the Springfield Files. His understanding of what radiation does to biological systems is not theoretical. It is personal and practical and as current as last week's treatment. A man who is actively managing the effects of radiation exposure in his own body on a weekly schedule, who has pharmaceutical and medical infrastructure specifically designed for this purpose, who has a dedicated medical staff whose expertise is in exactly this domain, has access to the knowledge of what sustained unmanaged radiation exposure does to an entire town's population. He knows because he is managing a smaller version of the same problem in himself. The difference is that he is managing his version with precision and resources and weekly professional intervention. Springfield is managing its version, or rather not managing it, with Homer Simpson asleep at the monitoring station. Homer's continued employment is not a coincidence or a management failure. When German investors briefly owned the plant, the first thing they did was fire Homer. They understood immediately that someone with Homer's qualifications in a safety oversight role was not a quirk of the hiring process, but an operational choice that served specific interests. The second thing they did was commission a compliance cost estimate that nearly destroyed them financially. Burns bought the plant back. He rehired Homer on his first day of recovered ownership. A competent safety inspector would have the facility shut down within weeks. Homer ensures the violations continue indefinitely. The radiation keeps leaking. The water stays contaminated. The biological effects on the population continue accumulating. And Burns's monopoly on Springfield's energy supply is maintained because a population too cognitively compromised by chronic neurological exposure to mount effective resistance is a population that will keep paying the electricity bill no matter what is in the water. The crayon in Homer's brain, the object that has been reducing his cognitive function since childhood, was eventually removed in the episode where the show finally allowed Homer to be briefly intelligent. Without the crayon, Homer was articulate, analytical, capable of understanding the world around him with a precision that his normal state does not allow. The intelligence was unbearable. He saw Springfield clearly for the first time. He saw his job clearly. He saw the architecture of the system that had kept him exactly where it needed him, doing exactly what it needed him to do, incapable of the sustained critical thinking required to recognize the pattern. And he chose to put the crayon back. He chose the fog. But how did a crayon get into a child's brain in the first place? And how did it remain there undetected through Homer's entire childhood, his entire adolescence, his entire adult life, through every medical checkup with Springfield's medical professionals, through every encounter with the healthcare system of the town he lived in? If every doctor in Springfield is simply too incompetent to find a foreign object in a patient's skull, the medical establishment is beyond redemption. If the doctors are not incompetent but are not finding the crayon because they are choosing not to look for it, or are looking for it and choosing not to report what they find, then the medical establishment is complicit in something. Burns's influence in Springfield is not limited to the power plant. Burns has resources and institutional reach that extends into every part of Springfield's civic infrastructure. The economy depends on him. The municipal politics respond to his preferences. The regulatory environment has been shaped over decades by his willingness to apply his resources to ensure outcomes that serve his interests. If Burns's interests are served by a population that cannot think clearly enough to challenge him, and if the medical establishment in the town he essentially owns is examining patients who carry unexplained cognitive limitations, the question of whether those limitations are noticed and reported and treated becomes a question about whose interests the medical establishment serves. Springfield does not have independent institutions. Springfield has institutions that operate within the constraints of a community that Burns has owned for a very long time. The mutation theory does not just explain the physical characteristics of Springfield's residents. It explains the community psychology, the memory failures, the inability to sustain attention on problems that require sustained attention, the normalized forgetting of catastrophes that should be unforgettable, the collective blindness to evidence that accumulates directly in front of everyone and is never addressed. Chronic radiation exposure at neurological levels does not simply produce physical symptoms. It affects the brain. It disrupts the specific cognitive processes responsible for sustained attention, for causal reasoning across time, for the ability to connect present symptoms to their historical causes. A population whose water has been contaminated for decades will, over time, develop exactly the cognitive profile that Springfield's residents display, capable of functioning in the immediate, unable to sustain the kind of long-form analytical thinking required to understand their own situation. The town cannot think its way out of what has been done to it, because what has been done to it has affected its ability to think. This is the most complete explanation for Springfield that the show has ever offered, embedded in 36 years of consistent visual evidence, consistent behavioral patterns, consistent institutional choices, and the single canonical fact of a three-eyed fish in a river downstream from a facility with 342 violations. Springfield is not a quirky cartoon town. Springfield is a contamination zone. The residents are not eccentric. They are symptomatic. And the power plant that dominates their skyline, that provides their electricity, that employs their neighbors and employs the man who is supposed to be watching it for danger, is the cause of every impossible thing about this place. Every yellow face, every four-fingered hand, every forgotten catastrophe, every reset, every moment where the show shows you something that should be alarming and nobody in Springfield is alarmed. It traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible substance into the same water, sustaining the same cognitive fog that prevents the people living inside it from understanding why they are the way they are. The plant is the show. It has always been the show, and nobody in Springfield will ever figure that out, because the plant already made sure they cannot. Rank 1, the Homer coma theory. The show is a dream. There is a theory about The Simpsons that changes the entire experience of watching it. Not in the way the mutation theory changes things, where you look at familiar images through a new interpretive lens and find evidence you had not previously noticed. This is different. This theory, if you follow it all the way to its conclusion, does not simply reinterpret what you are watching. It dissolves the foundation on which all of the watching rests. The Homer coma theory proposes that the entire run of The Simpsons, every episode, every season, every recurring character and evolving relationship and ongoing story is the dream of a dying man. That Homer Simpson suffered a catastrophic injury in the early years of the show and has been unconscious ever since. That Springfield, the town, every absurdity and impossible geography and reset and contradiction within it is a construction of Homer's unconscious mind, playing out endlessly in the dark while his body lies in a hospital bed that the audience has never been shown. Let us move through this slowly, because it deserves the care. The theory begins with a specific moment from a specific early episode, an episode from the fourth season titled So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise involves Bart pranking Homer on April Fool's Day, escalating each prank until one sends Homer to the hospital. While Homer is in his hospital bed, he attempts to get a candy bar from a vending machine across the room. The machine tips over and lands on him. The show depicts this not as a cartoon gag from which Homer bounces immediately back, but as a genuine medical crisis. Homer flatlines. He enters a coma. A real coma, not a cutaway, not a dream sequence, not a device that resets by the end of the act. A clinical, documented, 7-week unconscious state. The episode ends with Homer seemingly waking up. Bart is at his bedside. There is a tearful confession and a comedic strangling, and the family laughs. The show tells you he woke up, but the theory asks, what if he did not? What if the vending machine falling on Homer was fatal, or produced a brain injury severe enough that the recovery the episode depicts is itself the beginning of the dream? What if the moment before the machine fell was the last moment Homer was conscious, and everything that came after 30-plus years of Springfield, hundreds of episodes, the same family on the same couch in the same house has been happening entirely inside a mind that cannot wake up? The most immediate question is, why would Homer's unconscious mind generate this specific world? Why Springfield with all its strangeness, all its impossible geography, all its characters who behave in ways that defy the ordinary logic of a human community? Here, the theory finds its first strong answer. The world of a coma dream is not required to be consistent or logical. It is a product of an unconscious mind processing its own contents in the absence of waking constraint, and the unconscious mind does not employ a continuity supervisor or a fact-checker. It has memories and desires and fears and the people who mattered most to the dreamer, all of it tumbling together in the dark, forming shapes that feel like reality from inside them, but that look, from any external vantage, like exactly what they are. The Simpsons is the most narratively inconsistent long-running television program in history, and it is not casually inconsistent, the way any show might accumulate small continuity errors over decades. The Simpsons contradicts itself at the level of fundamental character facts. Homer's mother is alive, and then dead, and then alive again. The family's financial situation is desperate in some episodes, and comfortable in others with no economic event to explain the shift. Characters die and return without explanation, not in the manner of a show that acknowledges miraculous survival, but simply present again in the next episode, as if the death had occurred in a different continuity entirely. The death and return pattern is the most remarkable structural feature of the show, and it is the one that most directly supports the coma reading. When a character in Springfield dies and then reappears without explanation, the standard defense is that this is a cartoon, and cartoons operate with different rules about consequence and mortality. But The Simpsons has always positioned itself as something more grounded than classic cartoon absurdism. It has depicted grief with genuine emotional weight. The death of Maud Flanders altered Ned's trajectory for multiple seasons. The show knows how to treat death as real when it chooses to do so. Which means the reversals, the characters who die and come back without acknowledgement, are choices. They are the show doing something other than forgetting its own continuity. In the logic of a coma dream, these reversals are not errors. They are the mind doing what the mind does. The unconscious does not maintain a consistent record of what it has processed. It returns to the same material repeatedly from different angles, and when it needs a character to be present, it makes the character present regardless of what happened in a previous processing cycle. You have probably had a dream where someone you know to be dead was simply there, vivid and present, and the knowledge of their death sat somewhere outside the dream's logic rather than inside it. The dream did not explain their presence. The dream did not need to. It brought them back because you needed them there. Homer's dream needs Sideshow Bob to keep threatening the family and to keep being defeated, because the dream is processing Homer's fear of irreversible harm to the people he loves. It needs Bob to be persistent because the fear is persistent. It needs him to survive each defeat because the fear survives each resolution. When the show kills a character and then needs that character again for a subsequent processing cycle, the dream simply makes them available, because the dream's consistency runs on emotional logic rather than narrative logic. The town itself behaves exactly like a dream location. Springfield's geography cannot be mapped. This is not an obscure observation. It is one of the most well-documented features of the show, something its creators have addressed in interviews across decades. The town exists in a state they describe as deliberate ambiguity. No canonical state or region has been officially fixed. Different episodes place Springfield in different climatic and geographic contexts, and a character can cross the town in different amounts of time depending entirely on the needs of the scene. Buildings appear that have not previously existed in the established neighborhood. Streets that connect in one scene do not connect in another. The power plant, which should be a major fixed landmark against which everyone in Springfield can orient themselves, appears in different locations relative to the residential areas, depending on which episode you are watching. This is geography without coherence. It is place without space. It is the experience of a location in a dream where you are definitively somewhere, where the somewhere is vivid and specific and utterly real while you are inside it, but where any attempt to place it on a map or trace the route that brought you there dissolves into contradiction and impossibility. Dreams are location without geography. They are inside without outside. They are the experience of being somewhere without the underlying infrastructure of somewhere. Springfield is this. It has always been this. Now consider what Springfield is made of at the level of the people and relationships it contains. The coma theory proposes that Homer's unconscious generated Springfield from the psychological material it had available, the things he loved, the things he feared, the standards he measured himself against, the desires he had not resolved, the grief he carried, the hope he could not put down. Look at Burns through this lens. Burns holds absolute power over Homer's existence in the most direct way possible. He can remove Homer's livelihood at any moment. Homer cannot defeat Burns. Every episode that places them in conflict ends with Burns in the same position of institutional authority he occupied at the beginning. Burns ages but does not die, weakens but does not fall, is humiliated and diminished across individual episodes but returns for the next one in full possession of his castle and his power. This is not a story about a man Homer can beat. This is a dream about a man Homer cannot escape, who is always there, who always has what he has, who can always end everything with a single institutional decision. Burns is Homer's anxiety about powerlessness given a face and a name and an address across town. The dream cannot let him be permanently defeated because the anxiety itself is not something Homer's unconscious has resolved. The fear keeps returning, so Burns keeps returning. Now look at Ned Flanders. Ned is everything Homer fears he is not. Not in the way of cartoonish contrast, though the show presents it that way, but at the level of the things Homer actually cares about. Ned is patient. Ned is present for his children in the specific ways Homer worries he is not present for his own. Ned has financial security maintained without the chaos that characterizes Homer's economic life. Ned's faith is genuine and sustaining in a way that Homer's spiritual life is not. Ned's body is healthy and maintained in a way that Homer's body, in the dream's logic, is not. Ned lives next door. Ned is never not next door. He is the perpetual proximity of the standard Homer holds himself against. The dream places Ned right there, across the hedge, available at every moment as a comparison, because the unconscious mind does not allow the things it is working through to be set at a comfortable distance. The fear that you are inadequate does not live far away. It lives next door. And then there is Marge. The coma theory's most emotionally significant claim is about Marge, and it requires a kind of attention that the comedy of the show makes difficult to sustain. Marge Simpson, across decades of the show, has demonstrated a quality of patience and forgiveness and unconditional continued presence that is, in the context of the marriage the show depicts, not realistic. Homer has destroyed valuable things. He has made decisions of astounding irresponsibility that materially harmed the family. He has been selfish, oblivious, impulsive, and hurtful across an almost incalculable number of episodes. He has placed the family in danger repeatedly. He has failed Marge in ways that the show itself sometimes treats as serious and unforgivable, and then he has been forgiven, and then the marriage has continued. Not with the fragility that follows genuine rupture. Not with the altered trust and modified intimacy that real forgiveness involves, when the thing forgiven was significant. With the same warmth, the same closeness, the same Marge at the end of the episode still there, still his, still choosing him. This is not how marriages work in the waking world. It is how a man dreams of his marriage working. Homer, lying in the dark, in the real dark, in the hospital room, is afraid of something specific, that Marge is out there in a world he cannot reach, living a life that is moving forward without him, and that at some point she will have to move forward in a way that means she is no longer waiting. The waking world does this. It moves forward. It does not hold in place the way dreams hold things. The dream gives him what the waking world cannot guarantee. Marge who stays. Marge who forgives everything. Marge at the end of every episode, still in the house on Evergreen Terrace, still there. The dream must generate this repeatedly because the fear it is responding to does not resolve. Homer's unconscious cannot be certain that Marge will still be there if he wakes up. The only certainty available to him is the certainty of the dream, which he has made, which runs according to his emotional needs, in which Marge is as permanent as the couch and the television set and the yellow walls of the house he loves. But the fear is always there underneath it. The dream keeps circling back to it. Across the series, there are episodes where the marriage is genuinely threatened, where Marge is pushed past the point of patience, where Homer comes close enough to losing her that the dream has to work hard to resolve the situation. These episodes are not there simply because the writers enjoy marital jeopardy for dramatic tension. They are there because the fear that generated the dream in the first place is still present, still active, still requiring processing. Homer's unconscious creates the threat because the threat is real to him, and then it creates the resolution because the resolution is what he needs. The family comes back together at the end, not because family comedies always resolve happily, but because a dreaming man's mind reaches, every time, for the thing he is most afraid of losing, and brings it back and holds it for as long as the dream can hold it. There is a particular episode that the coma theory treats as among its most revealing, and it is one that rewards revisiting with this framework in mind. Season 8. You Only Move Twice. Homer accepts a new job from a man named Hank Scorpio, and the family relocates to a planned community called Cypress Creek. The episode is beloved partly for its comedy. Scorpio turns out to be a warmly enthusiastic global supervillain, and partly because it is the episode where Homer, for once, is genuinely valued at work. Scorpio sees Homer clearly and appreciates him. Homer flourishes in this environment. He is comfortable and confident and recognized, and he does good work, and he is happy in a way the show rarely allows him to be happy. Not comedically, not delusionally, but contentedly and sustainably. His family is miserable. Marge has no social context in the new town. Bart has been placed in a remedial class. Lisa has developed a grass allergy that cuts her off from the outdoors. The family is unhappy, and Homer, seeing their unhappiness, gives up the better life to return to Springfield. He chooses the family over everything else. He chooses the familiar over the flourishing. In the context of the coma theory, this is the most important thing Homer has ever done. The dream is showing him the moment that defined him, the moment he understood, completely, that the thing he chose above all other things was his family, that there was no trade he would make for them, that there was no better job or better version of his life worth the cost of their happiness. The dream returns to this knowledge over and over because it is the knowledge at the center of everything. It is why the dream keeps going, not only to process the failures and frustrations, though it does that too, but to return, endlessly, to the thing Homer chose and keeps choosing and cannot stop choosing because the choice is the deepest thing about him. He chose them. He is still choosing them. In every episode, in every reset, in every warm return to the house on Evergreen Terrace. Now consider the show's relationship with time. The Simpsons began broadcasting in 1989. Bart Simpson was 10 years old. In the episodes airing today, Bart Simpson is still 10 years old. Decades of cultural history have passed in the world outside the show, and the children of the family have not aged. The adults have not aged. The grandparents age but do not die. The show incorporates real-world cultural history through references and contemporary jokes, while simultaneously existing in a perpetual present where the family never moves forward in time. This is sometimes defended as a deliberate creative choice, the floating timeline, the standard approach for long-running animated series that want to avoid the complications of aging characters. But the floating timeline has a specific and haunting resonance within the coma framework. Coma patients do not age in their dreams. The dream preserves the dreamer's world at the moment it began, because the dream is made from material available at the moment Homer went under. That material includes a 10-year-old Bart and an 8-year-old Lisa and a 1-year-old Maggie, fixed at those ages because those were their ages when Homer last saw them clearly, when the world around him was still the waking world. The dream gives him his children at the ages they were. It cannot give him their futures because Homer does not know their futures. He knows the children he had on the morning before everything stopped. He knows the Bart who was 10 and the Lisa who was 8 and the Maggie who was 1, and so the dream holds them there, exactly as they were, because the love he has for them is love for exactly these people, the people he knew, not the people they might have become in the world that kept going without him. The eternal present of Springfield is the eternal present of a mind holding a specific moment with everything it has, refusing to let it move forward, refusing to let it end, keeping it exactly as it was on the last morning Homer was awake. Now consider the tonal shift in the show across its history. This is a documented observation that critics and fans have made for decades, entirely independent of the coma theory. The early seasons had a specific quality, grounded, working class, rooted in the recognizable frustrations of a particular kind of American family life. The stories dealt with Homer trying to quit drinking, Marge questioning her choices, Bart facing real academic consequences, Lisa developing a genuine crush, the family navigating financial stress and marital tension, and the ordinary weight of a life that is not going quite the way anyone planned. After the coma episode, the show's register shifts. Not immediately, not in a single jarring step, but across the following seasons in a trajectory that accelerates as it continues. Homer goes to space. Homer joins a secret society. Homer meets presidents. Homer holds hundreds of different jobs. Homer survives things that would kill a platoon of soldiers. The show that was once grounded in economic anxiety becomes a show where the main character has traveled to dozens of countries, befriended celebrities, and experienced more in a single season than most people experience in a lifetime. The coma theory offers a specific reframing of this shift. The Simpsons did not get bad. Homer's dream got more elaborate. A dreaming mind in the early stages of unconsciousness stays close to the life it knows, processing the familiar material first, working through the recent memories. As time passes, as the dream deepens and the familiar material is exhausted, the mind begins to generate more freely, to introduce the fantastical and the impossible alongside the domestic, because the dream has moved past the phase of processing the waking life and entered the phase of pure imaginative generation. The early seasons are Homer's memories. The later seasons are Homer's imagination operating at full creative freedom, unconstrained by the requirement to stay close to anything that actually happened. This is also why the later seasons feel different in emotional texture as well as narrative scale. The early seasons have the weight of real experience, the specific gravity of things that happened and are being processed. The later seasons have the quality of things that are generated rather than remembered, vivid and entertaining and sometimes beautiful, but missing the specific tethering to reality that gives the early work its particular emotional resonance. Homer's unconscious has, over the years, drifted further from the shore. The show has engaged with the coma theory directly, which is itself remarkable. In a much later season, the writers produced a fake deleted scene depicting Homer waking from a long coma to reveal that all the outlandish episodes had been a dream. The scene was presented as a genuine leak and then revealed as a staged hoax. The producers confirmed that it was not real, that Homer had not been in a coma, that the theory was a clever piece of fan speculation that the show was playfully acknowledging. But the show made the scene. They animated it. They depicted Homer waking up and showed it to the audience and said, "This is not what is happening. This is not the show you are watching," which is exactly what a dream would say when someone started to figure out that it was a dream. You would make the accusation visible and then make the accusation laughable, so that anyone who still believed it would feel silly for believing it. The denial is not evidence that the theory is true. The creators are allowed to say their show is not what the fans imagine it to be. But the fact that they engaged with it at all, that they built an entire fake scene around the theory's conclusion, tells you something about the theory's coherence. You do not spend production resources disavowing something that does not hold together. There is a detail the theory cannot fully resolve, and it requires honest acknowledgement. If Homer is in a coma, The dream has no natural terminus. It continues until the dreamer's body fails, and the show's continuation is therefore either the most heartbreaking thing imaginable, a man who will never wake up, whose dream is the only life he has left, or the continuation is evidence that something is still holding on out there, still present, still providing the warmth that the dream incorporates as episodes. Perhaps the monitors in the hospital room are still registering activity. Perhaps there are mornings when the family sits beside the bed and talks to him or reads to him or simply holds his hand, and the warmth of those moments enters the dream as another story, another chance for everyone to be together and be fine. Perhaps every episode is a visit. Perhaps every episode is the dream receiving the signal that they are still there, still coming, still sitting beside the bed and waiting. Perhaps he keeps dreaming because they keep coming. If the coma theory is true, The Simpsons is not a comedy. It is the longest love letter in the history of television, written in the dark, addressed to people who are just out of reach, filled with every version of them that Homer could imagine, running continuously because the love that is generating it has not stopped and will not stop. Homer will not stop dreaming until he stops, and if the show is still running, he has not stopped. The house on Evergreen Terrace is lit, the family is there. Homer is still at the kitchen table, still eating the donut, still finding them every morning like the first morning, still choosing them, still dreaming, still there. Bonus Maggie's secret. The most dangerous member of the family. Of all the Simpsons, Maggie gets the least attention. This is understandable from a surface reading of the show. Maggie is an infant. She cannot hold a sustained conversation, cannot drive or hold employment, or enter into the kinds of social and moral dilemmas that drive the series' stories forward. She is a background presence for most of the show's run, a pacifier and large eyes, and the warm implication of small babyhood, visible in the corner of family scenes, present but not driving anything. A constant that does not require development, because babies, by their nature, are not yet ready for development. The thing about Maggie is that this reading, the unchanged constant, the background infant, the character who is simply there because every family needs a youngest, may be the most dramatically incorrect reading of any character in the show's history. Maggie Simpson, examined carefully and taken seriously, is the most remarkable person in Springfield by a considerable distance. The evidence for this is scattered across the series in moments the show presents, and then moves past, as if it does not fully register what it has just shown you. Let us begin with what Maggie has done, as a matter of canonical record, across the run of the series. She shot Mr. Burns. This is the most famous thing Maggie has done, and it receives the most attention, but it is easy to underestimate because the show treated the aftermath with comedy rather than with the weight the action itself carries. A 1-year-old infant, in possession of a loaded firearm, in circumstances that the episode carefully constructs to make plausible, discharged a weapon that struck one of the most powerful characters in the show's universe. The evidence points to Maggie consistently. The gun was found in her possession. Her handprint was on it. Burns, upon waking from his own coma, named her. The episode's resolution is deliberately ambiguous. In its final moment, Burns's words trailing into something inaudible. But the investigative and visual logic of the episode's construction points in a single direction. Maggie shot Mr. Burns. Directed, at close range, with sufficient accuracy to wound her target. This is an extraordinary thing for anyone to do. For an infant who has not yet fully developed motor control, who cannot yet form spoken language, who cannot yet walk without assistance, this is beyond extraordinary. It is, within the show's own established reality, essentially impossible, which means either the show is not being honest about Maggie's actual capabilities, or Maggie Simpson possesses abilities that her presentation as a normal infant does not account for. The show is never not honest about the things it chooses to place in its canonical record. It may obscure them in comedy, it may present them without following through on their implications, but it does not put things in its episodes accidentally. Every canonical fact in The Simpsons was a choice. The choice to make Maggie the person who shot Burns was a choice about who Maggie is. Now consider what she has done across the rest of the series, in episodes that receive less cultural attention than the Burns shooting, but that collectively build the same portrait. She has saved Homer's life on multiple occasions. In situations of direct physical danger, where the available adult characters were not positioned to intervene, Maggie has provided that intervention not through the random motion of an infant that happened to produce a useful result, but with the timing and directed purpose of someone who understood the situation and selected a response. She has used objects with accuracy and force that infant motor development does not support. She has navigated environments with spatial awareness, inconsistent with her assigned developmental stage. The daycare episodes are particularly significant. Springfield's daycare facility, where Maggie spends her weekdays, is home to other infants with their own remarkable characteristics, including her long-running adversary, the unibrow baby Gerald, who appears in the very first scene of the show's title sequence, the two of them facing each other across a sandbox like small rival generals. This detail is not incidental. The show placed Maggie's antagonist in the title sequence, in the opening imagery that plays before every single episode. It has been there since the beginning, seen so often that it disappears into the familiar wallpaper. Two infants in a standoff. One representing something threatening, one representing Maggie. The show has been showing you this every week for 36 years. In the episode set inside the daycare, the social structure among the infants is revealed to be complete and sophisticated. Hierarchies, alliances, rivalries, and a shared communication system conducted entirely without language. Maggie is not simply participating in this structure. She is navigating it strategically. When conflicts arise that the adult caretakers cannot manage because they lack the communicative access required to address them, Maggie resolves those conflicts. She does not stumble toward resolution. She identifies the nature of the problem, determines the required action, and executes with the efficiency of someone who understood the situation clearly and made a decision before anyone else in the room registered that a decision needed to be made. There is a theatrical short film, released in cinemas in 2012 and nominated for an Academy Award, called The Longest Daycare. 7 minutes. No dialogue. Maggie alone at the daycare facility, wanting to protect a caterpillar from being destroyed by Gerald. What follows is a miniature action film in which Maggie outmaneuvers the bully, the caretaking staff, and the facility's physical environment to save the creature and release it. She reads the environment. She identifies threats. She develops strategies and revises them in real time when they fail. She executes multi-step plans that require spatial reasoning, timing, and the ability to predict other people's behavior with accuracy. She does all of this while being physically limited to the motor skills of a 1-year-old. Her body can barely keep up with her mind. She falls, she stumbles, she crawls when she needs to run. But her decision-making is precise. Every choice she makes is the correct one. Every move is optimized. She is operating at a cognitive level that her physical development cannot support, and she succeeds anyway because her intelligence compensates for every limitation her body imposes. Then there is the IQ test. In an episode focused on Maggie's development, her intelligence is formally assessed by the professionals responsible for her daycare evaluation. The result: Maggie's IQ cannot be measured by the instrument being used. The test is designed for infant cognitive assessment. Maggie's performance exceeds the range the test was calibrated to capture. The scene is played for comedy. The adults respond with surprise and pride, and then the deflating beat the show uses to prevent any single moment from accumulating too much gravity. And then the episode moves on. Maggie returns to the background, and the unmeasurable IQ sits in the show's canonical record, unexamined and unaddressed. But it is there. The show said it directly. Maggie Simpson's intelligence is beyond the capacity of standard assessment tools to quantify. That is a specific and remarkable canonical claim. The comedy wrapping does not reduce its specificity or its weight. The show put it in the record holds it. Now look at the pacifier. Maggie's pacifier is almost never absent. It is present during meals, during play, during sleep, during all of the family's activities across every episode of the series. This is unusual even for an infant character who uses a pacifier. The constancy goes beyond the developmental stage it represents, beyond what any real infant would maintain, beyond what even the show's other infant characters maintain. The theory holds that the pacifier is Maggie's choice. Not a comfort object that adults supply and maintain on her behalf, but a deliberate instrument of self-presentation that Maggie maintains for herself and for a specific purpose. The pacifier occupies the mouth. The pacifier, more than any other single accessory available to an infant, signals cognitive limitation. It says, visually and unmistakably, that its wearer is pre-linguistic, pre-rational, pre-capable of the kinds of communication and decision-making that the world around her takes seriously. An infant with a pacifier is not a person whose attention the powerful people in a room need to manage. An infant with a pacifier is background. An infant with a pacifier is safe to ignore. The pacifier is a method for being invisible. And the question that follows is, what does Maggie need to be invisible from? The immediate answer, within the Springfield context the series has established, is Burns. Burns, who collects unusual human attributes the way other powerful people collect art, who has demonstrated across many episodes an awareness of exceptional people in his community and a willingness to exploit what they offer, would find an infant of unmeasurable intelligence an extremely interesting asset. His history in Springfield provides no reason to believe that the sanctity of an infant's development would constrain him. He has reached into family lives for far lesser prizes. So Maggie makes herself invisible. She keeps the pacifier in. She allows the adults around her to see what they expect to see. A normal baby, slow and pre-verbal, and not yet in the world in any way that requires their full attention. She watches from the lower right corner of the frame, taking in everything, processing everything with an instrument that formal assessment has been unable to fully measure, and she does not let them see. There is a particular sophistication to this strategy that becomes apparent when you compare Maggie's situation to Lisa's. Lisa is brilliant. Lisa is a documented genius whose IQ has been formally established within the show at a level that places her well above the population norm. Lisa makes her intelligence visible at every opportunity, uses it as her primary mode of engaging with the world, announces herself as the most capable person in whatever room she occupies. And what has that intelligence gotten her? Isolation, mockery, dismissal. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets sidelined. Lisa tries to improve the world around her and encounters the weight of a community that has decided it is not interested in improvement. Her intelligence is her greatest gift and the thing that has made her childhood hardest, because she wears it on the outside, and the outside of Springfield does not reward this. The outside of Springfield has never rewarded this. Maggie watched this happen. Maggie has been watching this happen since the day she was born. She watched her sister fight every day for recognition and receive, again and again, the specific Springfield response to exceptional people who make their exceptionalism visible: resistance, dismissal, and the unspoken social pressure to become something smaller and more manageable. And Maggie learned the opposite lesson. Lisa learned, keep fighting regardless of the cost, because the fighting is the point, because giving up on the truth is worse than the cost of defending it. Maggie learned, silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less they notice you, the more you can accomplish. Do what needs to be done from below the level of their attention, and you will never have to fight the fights that Lisa fights, because they will never see you coming. Every time Maggie does something remarkable, what happens? The family does not notice. The community does not notice. Burns was shot, and the investigation focused on everyone except the baby, because who suspects a baby? The daycare rebellion succeeded because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. Every heroic act, every display of intelligence, every moment where Maggie saves the situation, it happens below the radar, in the margins, in the spaces where nobody is paying attention. And Maggie has ensured that nobody pays attention to her by maintaining the most effective disguise available. She appears to be exactly what everyone expects a baby to be: quiet, passive, helpless, dependent. She is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. There is another layer to the theory, one that engages with where this intelligence came from and what it suggests about the Simpson family's potential. Marge is underestimated. The show has established across multiple episodes that Marge possesses genuine intelligence, creative, perceptive, analytically capable in the situations where the story allows her to demonstrate it, that her social role within the family and the community systematically discounts. She is presented to the world as a homemaker, and the world responds to her through that presentation, missing the sharp and specific mind that operates behind it. This is, in part, a commentary the show makes about how the intelligence of certain people is categorized and minimized. But within the show's own logic, it is a canonical fact. Marge Simpson is significantly more capable than most of the people around her register. Homer, the crayon episode establishes, is also more capable than his ordinary presentation suggests. Without the foreign object suppressing his cognitive function since childhood, Homer is genuinely brilliant, analytically precise, verbally sophisticated, able to engage with complex problems in ways his normal cognitive state cannot access. The crayon has been in place for so long that the Homer the world knows is not the Homer who might have existed without the intervention. Maggie was born into this family. She inherited the genetic material of a mother of genuine intelligence and a father whose natural cognitive ceiling was considerably higher than his artificially suppressed floor. She arrived after the crayon was in place, after Homer had spent his entire adult life operating below his natural capacity, and she received what both parents were carrying before the damage was done and the compromises were made. She is what the family is naturally capable of when nothing is in the way. She is what Bart and Lisa might have been if the world had been different, if the environmental contamination had landed differently, if the systems that shaped them had been oriented differently. She is the full potential of the Simpson genetic line, concentrated in the one member who has not yet been processed by Springfield's institutional machinery, who has not yet been put through the school system or the economic system or the slow environmental accumulation that the mutation theory describes. She is holding all of that potential very quietly behind a pacifier in the corner of the room, and she is not using it yet, not because she is not ready. The evidence suggests she has been ready for a considerable time, but because she is patient in a way that nobody in this family has ever been patient, in a way that only someone with a very long view can sustain. She is not waiting for a signal or a permission. She is waiting for the right moment, the moment when what she does will matter most. When the timing is precisely correct, when the effect of her action will be maximized rather than merely visible. The show has never depicted this moment. It may never depict it. The floating timeline and the eternal present of Springfield mean that Maggie may remain 1 year old indefinitely, the pacifier always in, the watching never stopping, the moment she has been building toward perpetually deferred by a show that cannot let its characters change. But within the logic of the show's own canonical record, the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace is the one in the high chair. The most capable member of the Simpson family is the one who cannot yet walk without falling. The most strategic mind in Springfield is the one behind the pacifier, watching all of it, remembering all of it, waiting for the moment she decides the time has come. The show's recurring image of Maggie is always the same. She is in the corner of the room. The pacifier is in. The family is doing what the family does. Loud and loving and chaotic and warm. And Maggie is there, watching it all, fully present in a way that none of the people around her register, because nobody is looking for full presence in the infant in the corner. But she is there. She sees Homer's love and his failure and his effort and the way he keeps trying despite everything. She sees Marge's patience and the intelligence behind it and the work she does that nobody fully accounts for. She sees Bart's performance of rebellion and the boy underneath it who just needs someone to genuinely believe in him. She sees Lisa's loneliness and her gifts and the way the town does not know what to do with someone who wants more than the town is prepared to offer. She sees all of it. She has been seeing all of it from the beginning. One day, the theory holds, the pacifier will come out. When that day comes, the people of Springfield will not be ready. The family will not be ready. But Maggie will be. She has been ready for a very long time. She is just waiting, with the specific patience of the most capable person in the room, for the moment when readiness and timing and necessity all align. The most dangerous thing in Springfield is not the nuclear power plant. It is not Mr. Burns. It is not the billionaire with the weekly radiation treatments and the century of accumulated grudges. It is the baby in the corner, watching everything, saying nothing, holding more intelligence than the instruments of her world can measure, waiting for the right moment to finally speak. She has a lot to say. Closing the town that won't stop dreaming. And so we arrive here, at the quiet end of the list. In whatever small hours have found you, in the particular darkness of wherever you are, with Springfield still running somewhere behind your eyes, the yellow family on the yellow couch at the opening of every episode, as familiar now as anything in television has ever quite managed to be. 36 years is a long time to keep a light on. It is longer than many of the people watching the show have been alive. It spans the beginning of the consumer internet and every upheaval that followed it. It spans the transformation of the television landscape from a shared national experience into a personalized infinite scroll of options. It spans births and deaths and political upheavals and technological revolutions that none of the people who made the first episodes could have predicted. And through all of it on Thursday nights, and then Sunday nights, and in syndication at all hours, and on every streaming platform that eventually carried it, Springfield kept running. What we have spent this time doing is trying to understand why, not why the show kept being renewed, which is the business answer, the institutional inertia answer, the answer that explains the mechanism without illuminating the meaning. But why the show kept mattering in the specific way it has mattered, why it has stayed lodged in the cultural memory with a persistence that exceeds its commercial performance. Why people who have not watched a new episode in years still carry Springfield in their minds like a place they once lived and left and cannot quite stop thinking about. The theories expose the infrastructure of the attachment. The mutation theory tells us that Springfield is a place where the visible impossibilities of American industrial capitalism have been rendered as animation, where the power plant and the fish with 3 eyes and the billionaire who decided that compliance was not worth $56 million are all part of the same visible system that the people inside it cannot quite see clearly. Enough to name. The show put the contamination in the water and then put the evidence of the contamination on every character's hands, literally 4 fingers instead of 5, and asked the audience to watch for 36 years and notice. Most of us did not notice. We were inside the same fog as Springfield. We normalized the yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the ageless children the way Springfield normalized the 3-eyed fish, by seeing it every week until it stopped registering as strange. We became the people who look at the impossible and say, well, that is just how things are around here. The show had been telling us something about how we watch and what we normalize, and it used our own watching to make the point. The Skinner theory tells us that Springfield is a place that chose its comforting lie over its uncomfortable truth, and then formalized that choice, built a civic life around it, and criminalized the act of pointing out what had been done. Judge Snyder's decree is the funniest joke in the series and the most honest one. The town voted, the lie won. The real Seymour Skinner was tied to a train and expelled from the community he came home to reclaim. And the man wearing his name is still at the front of the school, still calling roll, still pretending to be someone he is not, while the entire town pretends alongside him. This is not satire about a fictional community. This is a document about how communities work when they need to maintain a version of reality that serves the people in power. Springfield is every town that has ever buried a scandal, rewritten a history, or exiled the person who would not stop telling the truth. The episode that people call the worst in the series is the episode that shows you most clearly how Springfield stays Springfield. The mechanism, the vote, the decree, the exile of the last honest man. The Burns longevity theory tells us that Springfield is a place where the accumulation of one man's power has been happening for so long that nobody alive can remember what the community looked like before it was organized around his interests. The dynasty outlasted everyone who built it and everyone who challenged it. It runs now on its own momentum, and the man at the center of it is older than the concept of the power plant itself, and the question of what comes after him is the question Springfield will not allow itself to ask. Because asking it would require imagining a Springfield without the infrastructure that Burns provides, and imagining that is, in Springfield, functionally the same as imagining the end of everything. The Ned Flanders theory tells us that goodness in Springfield is not natural but engineered, that the neighbor everyone envies is the neighbor who had the worst start and chose the most rigorous discipline, and built his entire outward personality as a clinical intervention against the darkness. The discipline was managing. The darkness is still there. Ned's breakdown in the hurricane episode is not a comedy beat about a man reaching his limits. It is a window into the person underneath the programming. And the person underneath is someone in profound pain who has been managing that pain since childhood through a structure that was always one catastrophe away from failing. God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. The man who has dedicated his entire life to faith receives silence, while the man who falls asleep in church and ignores every institutional instruction his religion provides receives direct divine conversation on multiple occasions. The show is not making a theological argument. It is making an argument about what the universe of Springfield rewards and what it does not, about who the system favors and who it lets suffer without intervention. And the answer, across 36 years of accumulated evidence, is consistent. The system favors Homer. It does not favor Ned. Not because Homer deserves it more, but because the system was not built around desert. It was built around something else. And Ned, for all his virtues, has never understood this, and probably never will. The Homer coma theory tells us something that all of the others are circling without quite reaching, that Springfield may be less a real place than a held place, a love that found a container when the world became unreachable, a family that someone kept dreaming about because letting go of the dream meant letting go of them. This is the theory that changes the emotional experience of watching the show most completely, because it takes the thing the show does most reliably, return the family to each other at the end of every episode, warm and intact, the house on Evergreen Terrace lit and welcoming as the credits roll, and reveals that warmth as the most heartbreaking thing in the show. The family is permanent because it is a dream. The love that holds it together is real, but the dreamer cannot reach them. He can only dream them. And the dream keeps going not because it is resolved, but because resolution would require something the dreamer cannot do. If you accept this theory, every episode you have ever watched is a love story. A man who loves his family so much that even in the dark, even in the unreachable silence of unconsciousness, he keeps building their world. He keeps making it warm. He keeps bringing them back to each other at the end of every story. Because the alternative, the end of the story, the closing of the dream, the silence after the credits that does not resolve back into a new episode is the thing he cannot face. Every episode is Homer refusing to let go. Every reset is Homer saying, "Not yet. Let it run a little longer. Let me have this a little longer." And the show keeps running because Homer has not stopped, because the love has not stopped, because the man in the hospital bed is still there, still dreaming, still finding his family every morning in the warm yellow light of a town that does not exist and never did and is the most real place in the world. These are the things The Simpsons has been saying. Not saying in the way that academic analysis extracts meaning from art, reading against the grain, finding what the creators did not consciously intend. Saying directly, in the images and the patterns and the canonical facts the show placed in its own record across hundreds of episodes and decades of storytelling. The three-eyed fish, the four-fingered hands, the 200-year-old man who runs everything, the judgment that carries a torture clause, the infant IQ score that breaks the instrument measuring it, the geographic coordinates that cannot be pinned to any map. The show has been telling us where it is and what it is doing. We have just had to learn to look. What The Simpsons has always been, underneath everything, is an examination of what it costs to love a place that has problems you cannot solve and people you cannot fix and systems too large for any individual to dismantle. The show does not offer solutions to the things it diagnoses. Burns is not brought down, the water is not cleaned, Homer does not wake up or does not grow up, depending on which theory you hold. The family does not escape Springfield and does not need to, because the family is not trying to escape Springfield. They are Springfield. They are as embedded in its contamination and its impossible geography and its memory failures and its loyal lies as the power plant is embedded in its hill above the town. And they love it here. That is the thing the theories cannot quite account for and the show cannot stop showing. They love it here, with the specific love of someone who knows the place is a little broken and who is a little broken themselves and who has decided, these are my people, this is my place, and that is enough. And sometimes more than enough. The theories are the show's skeleton. The love is its warmth. You need both to understand what you are looking at. There is a question worth sitting with as you move towards sleep. Not the investigative questions the theories ask, about who shot Burns and whether Homer is dreaming and what the plant has done to the water. A simpler question. Why do we keep going back? The show has been running longer than most of its audience has had continuous memories. There are people watching it tonight who were not born when the first episode aired. There are people watching it tonight who cannot remember a cultural landscape that did not include it. Springfield has been there, in the background of the culture, for as long as most of us can account for. And we keep returning to it with a consistency that does not entirely track with the show's artistic quality in any given season, that persists even through the periods when fans insist the show has lost what it once had, that seems to operate independently of whether any particular episode is good. Why? The most honest answer is also the simplest one. We keep going back because the family is there, because Homer is there, because the house on Evergreen Terrace is lit, the same as it was last week and the week before and the week before that, going back to December of 1989 and the first time the couch gag played and the family ran in from opposite sides and the television flickered on and the show began. The family is there, and they love each other, badly and well and imperfectly and completely. The way families love each other in the real world, and something in us responds to this with a recognition that does not require analysis. We recognize Homer's love because we have felt it. The specific feeling of loving your people more than you are capable of showing them, wanting to be more than you are, failing to be more, trying again, failing again, trying again. Not because you expect to succeed, but because the trying is the only form the love has that is available to you. We recognize Marge's patience because we have needed it, or given it, or watched it operate in someone near us, the specific kind of love that holds the structure together, not through dramatic sacrifice, but through the accumulation of 10,000 small daily choices to stay and to show up and to keep going. We recognize Lisa's loneliness because we have felt it, the specific loneliness of being capable of seeing something clearly that the people around you cannot or will not see, and having to live in the space between your understanding and the world's willingness to meet you there. We recognize Bart's rebellion because we remember it, or we wished we had it, or we are watching our own children live it. The performance of not caring, worn as armor over the specific vulnerability of caring very much. And we recognize Maggie's watching. The specific stance of the one in the family who sees everything and says nothing, who holds more than they reveal, who is waiting for the moment when speaking will matter, and until then, choosing the more powerful option of silence. These are not cartoon characters. They are shapes that our lives take. They are the forms that love and frustration and intelligence and patience and loneliness and hope take when they live together in a house and call themselves a family. The Simpsons has been showing us ourselves for 36 years. In yellow, with 4 fingers, in a town that cannot be found on any map, in a family that never ages and never ends. And we keep going back not because the show is always good, but because the reflection it offers is always true. Springfield is everywhere and nowhere, as the theories have established. It cannot be mapped because it is not a specific place. It is the composite of every American community, every working-class neighborhood, every small city where the factory defines the economy, and the economy defines the life, and the life loops back to the factory. It is the town you grew up in, whatever town that was. It is the family you came from, whatever shape that family took. The light on Evergreen Terrace has been on for 36 years. It is on right now, wherever Springfield is, which is everywhere, which is where you are. Go to sleep now. Homer is home. Marge is there. Bart is probably doing something he should not be doing, because he always is, and tomorrow someone will deal with it and everything will be fine. Lisa is in her room with the saxophone, working through something she has not yet found the words for, and Maggie is in the corner, the pacifier in, the eyes open, watching all of it with the specific attention of someone who loves her family and is keeping score of everything and is waiting, patiently and permanently, for the right moment to finally speak. The family is fine. The family is always fine. Springfield will be here in the morning exactly as it was tonight, exactly as it was the night before, and the night before that, going back to the first week, and the first episode, and the first time you sat down and watched a yellow family on a yellow couch and felt, without being able to explain why, that you were home. You found it again tonight. Sleep well. Good night from Springfield. Good night. Expanded. The economics of Springfield, how one town built its own trap. There is something the theories keep circling that deserves its own examination, something that sits underneath the radiation theory and the coma theory and all the others, like a foundation that none of them fully articulate on its own. The economics of Springfield. How the town actually works. Who holds the money and why they hold it, and what the holding means for everyone else. Because when you map the financial geography of Springfield, what you find is not a normal American town with a normal American economy and normal American problems. What you find is a system so perfectly constructed to serve the interests of one person that it could not have evolved naturally. It had to have been designed. Let us start with the basic structure. Springfield has one major employer, the nuclear power plant. Burns owns the plant. Burns is therefore the primary source of employment income for the town. The people who work at the plant earn their wages from Burns. They spend those wages in Springfield's businesses. Those businesses pay their rent and their taxes and employ their own workers. And those workers, when they are not employed by Springfield's small businesses, often have a family member at the plant. This is a company town. Not in the historical sense of a town that was literally built by a single company, though the show establishes that the Burns dynasty has been present in Springfield for long enough that the distinction is largely academic. It is a company town in the functional sense. The economic life of the community flows through a single entity, and that entity's owner is the only person in the community whose financial well-being is entirely independent of the community's health. If Burns decides to raise electricity rates, every household and business in Springfield pays more. If Burns decides to cut wages at the plant, the economic effect ripples through every commercial relationship in the town. If Burns decides to close the plant entirely, the town's economy collapses. These are not hypothetical powers. They are structural realities of the community that the show has depicted repeatedly and the characters have lived with for decades. The plant is not the only thing Burns owns. The show has established, across many episodes, that Burns's holdings extend into multiple areas of Springfield's commercial life. He has owned media properties. He has had controlling interests in businesses that appear, to the townspeople, to be independent local enterprises. He has used his resources to acquire things that other characters value and need, not because he personally wants them, but because ownership is the mechanism through which control is exercised. Burns's relationship to Springfield's economy is not the relationship of a businessman to his market. It is the relationship of a feudal lord to his estate. The people of Springfield work on his land, consume his power, and live within an economic structure that he owns at every level he has chosen to own. And the people of Springfield cannot leave. This sounds like an overstatement, but the show supports it. The show depicts, repeatedly, characters who attempt to escape their Springfield circumstances through economic means, through new jobs, new opportunities, paths that would take them outside the orbit of the town's primary economic gravity, and who find themselves returned to Springfield by the end of the episode. Homer has been offered positions elsewhere. He has taken them. He has always come back. The coma theory says he comes back because the dream cannot take him away from the family. The mutation theory says he comes back because the radiation has made him cognitively incapable of sustaining the executive function required to successfully relocate and start over. The economics theory says something different. He comes back because there is nowhere else for him to go that is genuinely better than where he is, and the structure of his life in Springfield, the mortgage, the family's school situation, Marge's social ties, the specific, irreplaceable texture of a life lived in one place for a long time makes leaving functionally impossible for anyone without extraordinary resources or extraordinary motivation. Burns has ensured, through the deal he struck with Grandpa Simpson, that Homer will always have a job at the plant. Homer's employment is protected regardless of his performance. This sounds like a benefit. Within the economic framework of Springfield, it is a trap. Homer cannot be fired. He also cannot be promoted in any meaningful way, cannot leverage his job security into better terms, cannot use it as a bargaining chip in any negotiation. He has unconditional employment at a fixed level, which is economically equivalent to having a ceiling installed just above where you are. He cannot fall. He also cannot rise. He is exactly where he is, permanently, because Burns needs him exactly where he is, permanently. The deal that protects Homer was made, as the show eventually reveals, in exchange for Grandpa's silence about something Burns did. Something that Burns could not afford to have become public. Something significant enough that Burns valued Homer's guaranteed employment as a reasonable price for Grandpa's discretion. The show does not fully specify what the secret was. It gestures toward it across multiple episodes and leaves the specifics in the comfortable ambiguity of things that are more useful as implied threats than as revealed facts. But the structure of the deal tells you something important about how Burns thinks about people. He does not think about them as people. He thinks about them as variables in a calculation. Grandpa knows a thing. The thing, if known, costs Burns something. Homer's guaranteed employment costs Burns less than the thing costs him. Therefore, Homer gets the guaranteed employment. Not because Burns feels any obligation to Homer or any loyalty to the Simpson family, because Homer's guaranteed employment is the cheaper option in a transaction that is entirely about Burns's interests. Homer has been protected for his entire adult working life by a deal that was made over his head about his future without his knowledge, for reasons that had nothing to do with him. He is safe not because he earned the safety, but because someone else's silence was valuable enough to purchase it. And Homer does not know this. He has never known this. He goes to work every morning at a facility he did not choose for reasons he does not understand, protected by an arrangement he cannot see, in a town whose economic structure ensures he will never be in a position to choose differently. That is the economics of Springfield. It is not a market, it is a mechanism. A mechanism designed, consciously or through the accumulated weight of historical decisions, to keep the people of Springfield exactly where they are, paying Burns for the electricity that powers their homes, earning wages from Burns that they spend in a local economy. Burns has touched at every significant point, unable to generate the kind of independent wealth that would allow any of them to challenge the structure they live inside. The three-eyed fish is in the water. The water comes from the tap. The tap is connected to a supply system that runs through infrastructure whose maintenance Burns controls. The electricity that purifies the water comes from the plant. The plant is Burns's. Every glass of water anyone in Springfield drinks passes through the economic and physical infrastructure of a man who knows what is in it and has decided that disclosure would cost more than it is worth. This is the economy of Springfield. It has been running this way for over a century, and the people living inside it are too embedded in it to see it clearly, too dependent on it to challenge it, and the mutation theory would add too cognitively compromised by it to fully understand why their situation feels so permanent. The supporting cast as symptoms. A closer reading of who Springfield produces. The theories we have examined focus primarily on the Simpson family and on Burns, which is appropriate. They are the central characters and the central conflict. But Springfield's supporting cast deserves attention, because the supporting cast is where the mutation theory and the coma theory and all the others make their strongest claims. The supporting cast of Springfield is, in aggregate, a portrait of what a community looks like when its institutions have failed it for a very long time. Consider Chief Clancy Wiggum. Wiggum is the head of Springfield's police department. He is also, by almost any objective measure, one of the least competent law enforcement officials in the history of fiction. He has failed to prevent crimes that were announced in advance. He has arrested the wrong person with the wrong evidence. He has disclosed the details of ongoing investigations to the suspects being investigated. He has accepted bribes with a casualness that suggests the practice is institutional rather than individual. He has, in the Who Shot Mr. Burns investigation, conducted a criminal inquiry that would not have survived a first-year law school examination of its methodology. The show plays Wiggum as a comedy character, and the comedy works because Wiggum's incompetence is consistent and spectacular, and because Ralph, his son, is one of the most purely comic characters in the series. But if you set the comedy aside and look at Wiggum as a functional element of Springfield's institutional landscape, what you see is a police department that effectively does not exist as a check on the behavior of anyone with the resources and connections to ignore it. Burns has those resources. Burns has those connections. The police department's functional non-existence is, from Burns's perspective, not a civic problem but a structural advantage. A police department that actually investigated the power plant's violations, that actually followed the environmental laws that govern radioactive waste disposal, that actually took seriously the evidence that the town's water supply has been contaminated for decades, that would be an existential threat to everything Burns has built. Wiggum is not an accident. He is the product of an institution that serves the community it is embedded in, and the community it is embedded in has been shaped at every institutional level by the interests of the man who owns its power supply. Consider Dr. Julius Hibbert. Hibbert is Springfield's primary physician. He is also, in the context of the mutation theory, the person whose professional responsibility most directly overlaps with the central claim of that theory. If Springfield's residents are showing symptoms of chronic radiation exposure, if the community's health outcomes are being affected by the contamination the plant is producing, if there are patterns in the medical records of Springfield's population that a competent physician would recognize as inconsistent with normal environmental baseline, Hibbert should know. Hibbert should be seeing this in his practice every day. And Hibbert laughs. This is Hibbert's defining characteristic, the warm, slightly unsettling laugh that accompanies every disclosure he makes to patients, regardless of whether the disclosure is appropriate to laughter. He delivers terrible diagnoses with the same chuckling warmth he brings to routine checkups. He moves through his practice with the effect of someone who has achieved a profound equanimity about the things he is seeing. There are two readings of this. The first, Hibbert is simply a comic character whose laugh is a running gag, and nothing about his behavior is meant to carry the weight of the mutation theory's implications. The second, Hibbert's laugh is the behavioral presentation of a professional who has been seeing the effects of the town's contamination for long enough that he has developed a psychological accommodation to it. The laugh is not equanimity. It is the coping mechanism of a man who knows what he is seeing and has decided, consciously or unconsciously, that there is nothing he can do about it that would not cost him more than he is prepared to pay. Both readings coexist in the show. The show is generous enough to support either, but the second reading is the one that makes Hibbert's presence in the show's world coherent rather than simply comic. Consider Apu Nahas Sapi Mapetalon. Apu runs the Quick E-Mart, which is not simply a convenience store but the social hub of Springfield's working-class commercial life. More transactions happen in the Quick E-Mart than in any other business in the town. More casual social interaction happens there. More of Springfield's daily life passes through its doors. Apu is present for all of it, behind his counter, for impossibly long shifts, in possession of a doctorate in computer science that he earned before circumstances placed him behind a register in a town far from the opportunities his education should have opened. Apu is not where he planned to be. He is not doing what he worked toward. He has a credential that, in a different economic environment, would have generated a completely different life. And he is in Springfield, behind the counter of a franchise whose corporate structure ensures that the economic benefit of his labor flows primarily to an entity far above him. This is not a story about the Quick E-Mart. This is a story about what happens to ambition and education and potential when the community you are embedded in does not have the infrastructure to use what you have to offer. Apu is Springfield's most vivid example of misallocated human capital. A highly educated, genuinely capable person trapped by circumstance in a position that neither requires nor rewards what he actually has to offer. This is what communities that have been economically hollowed out produce. Not failure. Apu is not a failure in any meaningful sense, but the specific quiet tragedy of capability that cannot find its proper expression because the environment it is embedded in does not have room for it. Consider Patty and Selma, Marge's sisters. They work at the DMV. They smoke constantly. They carry a specific quality of exhausted disappointment that the show has maintained as their defining emotional register for 36 years. They are unkind to Homer and genuinely loving toward Marge, and ambivalent about almost everything else. The theories do not focus much on Patty and Selma, but their presence in the show performs a function that is worth naming. They are Springfield's portrait of what happens to people when the path they were on did not go where they expected it to go, and when the disappointment has had long enough to calcify into personality. They did not plan to be at the DMV. They had at some earlier point aspirations that looked different from this. The show has gestured at their past in various episodes, relationships that did not work out, ambitions that did not materialize, the specific way that a life that seemed open at one point can close down around you over time until what you are left with is the job you have and the cigarettes you smoke and the visits to your sister's house where someone will always be happy to see you. They are not tragic characters. They are entirely human ones. And their presence in Springfield's social fabric is the show's acknowledgement that the community it is depicting contains not just the spectacular failures, the Homer-scale disasters, and the Burns-scale corruptions, but the quieter, more widespread story of lives that simply did not go the way anyone planned, and the specific adaptation that living that story requires. Springfield produces this in abundance. The people of Springfield are, in aggregate, people who made their peace with something, with the town they are in, with the job they have, with the circumstances that brought them here and the circumstances that keep them here. Not happily, not always, but with the specific resilience of people who have decided that making peace is better than the alternative. This is what the mutation theory might call cognitive compromise. This is what the coma theory might call Homer's version of the community he grew up in. This is what the economics theory calls the outcome of a company town that has been running long enough to shape the expectations of everyone who grew up inside it. And this is what the show loves about Springfield. Not the theories and the dark readings, but the people themselves. The people who made their peace, who love each other imperfectly and show up for each other unexpectedly and find, in the margins of their circumscribed lives, moments of genuine warmth and genuine connection. That is what Springfield is when you strip the theories away. Not a contamination zone, not a dream, not an empire built on exploitation, though it is all of these things. It is a community of people who are making the best of what they have, who are more than the systems that constrain them, who love each other in ways the systems cannot account for. The theories tell you what Springfield is made of. The show tells you what Springfield is for, and they are not in conflict. The best art has always been about both. The structure and the love, the darkness and the warmth, the system that grinds people down, and the people who refuse to be entirely ground. Springfield is both. It has always been both. The final loop. Why every theory leads back to the same place. We have now been through the full list. We have started at the bottom, with the mystery of a town that cannot be found on any map, and worked our way up through the secret agendas and hidden histories and impossible survivals, through the man in the dream who will not let his family go, and arrived here, at the end, with what the theories have collectively shown us. Every theory in this list is different. Every theory uses different evidence, different logic, different assumptions about what the Simpsons is and what it is trying to say. The mutation theory is a theory about biology and power and the specific cruelty of an institutional arrangement that benefits from keeping its community too damaged to challenge it. The Skinner theory is a theory about truth and the social mechanisms that communities build to avoid confronting it, and about what happens to the person who insists on the truth in a community that has voted to make truth illegal. The Burns immortality theory is a theory about wealth, and what wealth, accumulated over long enough periods, does to the relationship between a powerful person and the rest of the world. The Ned Flanders theory is a theory about goodness and what goodness costs, and what it looks like from the inside when you have built your entire identity as a defense against something that is still present in you. The Who Shot Burns theory is a theory about narrative and how official answers are constructed, and what it means when the official answer forecloses questions that the evidence has not actually settled. The predictions theory is a theory about satire and cultural influence, and the difference between prophesying the future and preparing the culture to recognize the future when it arrives. The Mona Simpson theory is a theory about how power reproduces itself across generations, and about the specific way that one man's grudge can determine the shape of a life that never had any obvious connection to that grudge. The coma theory is a theory about love, and what love does when the world makes it impossible to reach the people you love, and whether a life spent dreaming about your family is a tragedy or the only heaven a certain kind of person could ask for. And yet, every theory arrives at the same place. Through different paths, using different evidence, following different logical threads, every single one of the theories we have explored tonight arrives at the same destination. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something fundamental, something structural, something that goes deeper than animation style or episodic storytelling, or the accumulated quirks of a show that has run for too long. Something has broken the normal rules of reality in this town, and the show has been telling us about it since the very first episode. Not through exposition, not through dramatic reveals, through accumulation, through repetition, through the slow, patient layering of detail upon detail until the picture becomes undeniable to anyone who is paying attention, but nobody in Springfield is paying attention. That is the show's most consistent and most important observation about the community it depicts. The three-eyed fish is in the river. The four-fingered hands are on every person in town. The ageless children are aging through decades of school years without graduating. The billionaire is on his weekly treatments and glowing in the dark. The man who is supposed to be protecting the reactor is asleep at his station, and nobody asks. Nobody connects the dots. Nobody holds the picture together long enough to see what it shows. Because the show has also told us why. The radiation theory says the cognitive compromise is chemical, produced by the same contamination that is responsible for the physical symptoms. The collective denial theory says the social structure actively discourages the asking of questions that would be threatening to the community's stable fiction. The coma theory says nobody can ask the questions because nobody in Springfield is real. They are all Homer's dream, and Homer's dream needs them to stay exactly as they are. They are the same answer. In different languages, using different theoretical frameworks, the same answer. The people of Springfield cannot see what is happening to them because their environment, whether that environment is chemical, social, or metaphysical, has compromised their ability to look clearly at their own situation. And we, watching from outside, have been in Springfield long enough that we have started to share their condition. We have normalized the yellow skin. We have accepted the four fingers. We have watched the vending machine fall on Homer and the credits roll, and the next episode begin without ever stopping to ask whether Homer woke up. We became Springfield. We pressed pause in 1989 and we never pressed play. And now here we are, decades later, watching the same family in the same house on the same street, in the same impossible town, unable to let go, unwilling to let them age, keeping the loop running because the loop is warm, and the alternative, the one where the show ends and the family ages and Bart graduates and Lisa moves away and Homer gets old and Marge is left in an empty house on Evergreen Terrace, is colder than we can bear to imagine. The Simpsons are trapped in a loop because we trapped them there. We are the ones who pressed pause. We are the ones who keep the dream going. We are the town that voted for the lie, because the truth that time is passing, that we are older, that the couch we sat on as children watching the opening credits is gone, or in someone else's house, is a truth we are not ready for. Homer's coma is ours. Springfield's denial is ours. The floating timeline is not a cartoon convention. It is our wish. It is the thing we are asking the show to do for us every week. Hold still, just a little longer. Hold the family together, keep the lights on. Let us come home. And the show obliges. It has always obliged. Because the show understands, at some level beneath the comedy and the theories and the 36 years of episodes, what it is for. It is for coming home. That is the final mystery of The Simpsons, and it is not a mystery at all. It is the oldest thing in the world. It is the reason the light is still on. Come home. The family is there. They are always there. Good night. The anatomy of a Springfield mob. What the background characters reveal. There is a specific image that The Simpsons returns to more than almost any other. It appears across seasons and storylines and tonal shifts, consistent in its basic shape even when the specific context varies. The mob, Springfield riots. This is a canonical fact about the community, established early and maintained throughout the run of the series. The people of Springfield form mobs at a rate and for reasons that would be extraordinary in any real-world community. They have rioted over sporting events and political speeches and rumors and misunderstandings and the arrival of new businesses and the departure of old ones. They have formed mobs in response to perceived threats that turned out to be misidentifications, and they have maintained those mobs enthusiastically even after the misidentification was revealed. The show treats the mob as a comic staple, and it is an effective one. There is a reliable laugh in the image of Springfield's population transforming, within seconds, from individual citizens going about their individual lives into a collectively animated force moving toward a target with the specific, purposeful energy of people who have forgotten, temporarily, that they are individuals. But the mob is also the mutation theory's most visible evidence. A community that riots this frequently, over-triggers this minor, is demonstrating a collective emotional regulation problem. The neurological processes that govern impulse control, that allow individuals to pause between stimulus and response long enough to evaluate whether their response is appropriate, that enable the kind of sustained reasoning required to distinguish a genuine threat from a misunderstanding. These are the processes most vulnerable to chronic neurological stress, of the kind that radiation exposure produces over time. Springfield's hair-trigger collective response is not a character quirk about the townspeople's excitability. It is a symptom. The same symptom at the community level that Homer displays at the individual level, the inability to maintain the gap between stimulus and response, the tendency toward impulsive action that bypasses evaluation, The forgetting of context that makes one moment feel just as urgent and immediate as any other moment. Homer falls asleep at the reactor controls because he cannot sustain the attentional focus required for watchful vigilance over extended periods. Springfield forms a mob because the community cannot sustain the collective attentional focus required to evaluate a situation before responding to it. Same cause, same symptom, different scale. The mob is also the show's most efficient tool for demonstrating the collective denial mechanism the Skinner theory identifies. A mob does not think. A mob feels and moves and acts on the feeling without the interpretive layer that thinking requires. And a community that has organized its social life around the suppression of certain kinds of thinking. The thinking that asks questions about the power plant, the thinking that notices the fish's three eyes, the thinking that remembers last week's catastrophe and connects it to this week's normalcy. A community like this would, naturally and inevitably, be more susceptible to the mob's logic than to the individual's. The mob is the denial made kinetic. It is the town moving together in a direction that nobody has individually chosen, toward a target that nobody has individually evaluated. Because moving together in a direction feels better than standing still and thinking. Springfield mobs are not random. When you trace the targets of Springfield's mobs across the series, a pattern emerges. The town mobs toward threats to its comfortable fiction. It mobs toward outsiders who challenge the established order. It mobs toward inconveniences that threaten the stability of daily life. It rarely mobs toward the actual sources of its structural problems. The mob has never surrounded the power plant. The mob has never marched on Burns's mansion in sustained, organized, purposeful protest of the contamination that the show has been documenting for 36 years. Individual episodes have depicted individual characters confronting Burns, but the mass energy of the community, the same mass energy that mobilizes so reliably around sporting events and bear sightings, has never been directed at the thing that would most justify it. The radiation theory says this is because the cognitive compromise produced by the contamination has specifically impaired the community's ability to sustain the kind of long-form causal reasoning required to connect their symptoms to their source. The collective denial theory says the community has made an institutional decision to not look at this particular thing, and the mob, which is the community's most direct expression of collective will, reflects that decision. Either way, the result is the same. Burns is safe. The plant keeps running. The water stays contaminated. And the mob finds other targets, closer and less structurally significant, and pursues them with the energy that would otherwise need to go somewhere else. The Treehouse of Horror as confession. Every year, The Simpsons produces a Halloween special. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, now numbering over 30, operate outside the show's normal continuity. Characters die and are resurrected within the episode. Physics functions differently. The show's reality is explicitly suspended in favor of horror and science fiction and absurdist parody. The Treehouse episodes are, within the show's framework, explicitly not real. They are designated as not canon, as dreamlike departures from the ongoing story, as spaces where the show can do things it cannot do in normal episodes without consequence. And yet the Treehouse episodes keep returning to specific anxieties that also appear in the show's canonical storylines. Homer's body. The Treehouse episodes have depicted Homer being destroyed and reconstituted, transformed, enlarged, divided, weaponized, possessed, and reassembled in a remarkable variety of ways. The normal episodes do something similar. Homer's body absorbs punishment and survives things that should be fatal, but the Treehouse episodes amplify this into explicit horror imagery. Homer as a monster. Homer as a vessel for something larger than himself. Homer as a thing rather than a person. This is not incidental. The Treehouse episodes are the show processing. In the mode of acknowledged fiction, the anxieties that the canonical episodes process in the mode of comedy. Homer's impossible survivability is funny in the canonical episodes and horrifying in the Treehouse episodes, but it is the same fact about Homer in both registers. His body does not work the way normal bodies work. The mutation theory notes that the Treehouse episode's most common horror imagery, transformation, contamination, bodily wrongness maps directly onto the biological effects of radiation exposure that the theory identifies as Springfield's central secret. The Treehouse episodes are the show acknowledging, in the designated space for acknowledged fiction, the reality that the canonical episodes cannot acknowledge directly. The show cannot have Homer walk into the plant and discover that decades of radiation exposure have produced specific, measurable changes in his cellular structure, because that would require the show to resolve the central conflict of the mutation theory rather than sustaining it indefinitely. But it can have Homer transform into something monstrous in a Halloween episode, and the transformation can use the same visual grammar as radiation-induced mutation, and the audience can respond to both the comedy of the canonical episodes and the horror of the Treehouse episodes without necessarily connecting the two. The Treehouse episodes are the show's confession booth, the place where the things that cannot be said directly are said through the acceptable fiction of horror and fantasy. Not everything in the Treehouse episodes is a coded confession about Springfield's canonical secrets. Some of them are simply parodies of horror films with Springfield characters in the roles. But the recurring anxieties, the ones that appear in Treehouse episode after Treehouse episode across the decades, deserve attention. Bodies that transform, communities that turn on their members, authority figures who pursue and control, children who are not what they appear, families separated by forces they cannot control or understand. These are the anxieties of Springfield rendered as explicit horror. They are the canonical stories told without the comedy that makes them bearable. The Treehouse of Horror is the show looking in the mirror without the yellow skin and the cartoon proportions, and seeing what is actually there. The couch gag as philosophy. Every episode of The Simpsons begins the same way. The family rushes to the couch. They arrive at the couch. Something happens, the couch gag that varies episode to episode, ranging from a simple visual joke to an elaborate animated sequence to a complete short film by a guest director, and then the episode begins. The couch gag has been a feature of the show since its first season. It is the most recognized structural element of the show's format, more recognized even than the chalkboard gag or the Homer catching the donut at the nuclear plant sequence. The couch is where the show announces itself. It is the visual signature that says, "You are watching The Simpsons. This is where we begin." Within the coma theory, the couch gag is something else. The couch is where Homer is going. Every episode, every reset. The show begins with the family running toward the couch from different directions, from different starting points, from wherever they were when the episode found them and ending up together, on the couch, watching television, present as a family in the house on Evergreen Terrace. This is what Homer wants. This is the thing the dream is always moving toward. Not the plot of the episode, not the space adventure or the mystery or the social comedy, but the moment before the plot. The moment when the family is just there, gathered in the same room, about to sit down together. The couch gag is the dream's thesis statement, repeated at the beginning of every episode, reminding the dreamer what the dream is for. The family runs home. The family reaches the couch. The family is together. Then the episode can begin. Then the story can unfold. Then whatever adventure or disaster or comedy the dream has generated for this particular cycle can play out, knowing that it will resolve, as it always resolves, with the family intact, in the house, on the couch, fine. The couch gag is not a structural convention. It is the dream's promise to itself. Everything that happens in this episode will bring the family back here, to this room, to this couch, to each other. No matter what the episode does, no matter how far it takes the characters from the house on Evergreen Terrace, this is where it ends. The dream runs toward the couch. Homer runs toward the couch. The family runs toward the couch. And every single week, they make it. They always make it. That is the deepest thing The Simpsons has ever done. Not any individual episode or theory or mystery. The simple, weekly, 36-year-long insistence that whatever else happens, the family finds its way back to each other. Every week, without fail, without exception, they run home. And they are always there when they arrive. Homer and Bart. The relationship the show keeps examining. There is a relationship at the center of The Simpsons that receives less theoretical attention than the Homer-Burns dynamic or the Homer-Marge dynamic, but that the show has consistently treated as its deepest and most emotionally complex material, Homer and Bart. The strangling gag Homer's hands around Bart's neck, Bart's eyes bugging out, the throttle and the recovery is one of the most recognized running jokes in the series. It is also, if you take it seriously for a moment, a remarkable thing for a children's animated series to have made its signature comedic beat. The father strangling the son provoking the father, The violence and the forgiveness cycling so quickly that they become indistinguishable from affection. This is a show about a father who does not know how to love his son without also being driven to fury by him, and a son who does not know how to receive love without first testing whether it is real by pushing against it until it breaks, and then discovering, again and again, that it does not break. Bart is the character the show has most consistently used to explore the limits of Homer's love. Not Marge, who has Homer's devotion in a form that the show depicts as essentially unconditional. Not Lisa, whose relationship with Homer is warm but tinged with mutual incomprehension across a cultural and intellectual gap they have never fully bridged. Bart. Bart is the one who pushes. Bart is the one who pranks and schemes and creates consequences that fall on Homer with a consistency that should have produced a very different relationship than the one the show depicts. And yet the relationship is warm. Not always, not in every moment, but in the aggregate. Across the whole of the show's run, Homer and Bart find their way back to each other. The most affecting episodes in the series are the ones where the show drops the comedy and lets the relationship speak for itself. The episode where Bart, having done something that has cost Homer significantly, finds Homer sitting quietly in the aftermath, not angry, just tired and sad. And Bart, seeing this, understands something about consequences that he could not have understood while the comedy was running. The episode ends without resolution, without the strangling, without the comedic bounce back. It ends with Bart having seen his father as a person rather than a prop, and with Homer having seen his son as a person who is genuinely sorry. These moments are rare, which is part of why they work. The show has built enough comedic infrastructure around the relationship that when the infrastructure drops away and the real thing is visible underneath, the real thing lands with the weight of everything that was built around it. Within the coma theory, the Homer-Bart relationship is the most poignant element of the dream. Homer, unconscious, dreaming his family, has constructed a version of his relationship with his son that contains both his love for the boy and his fear that the boy does not entirely know how loved he is. The dream gives Homer the arguments and the reconciliations and the moments of genuine connection because those are the things Homer needs to believe are possible. The strangling in this reading is not violence. It is the dream's honest acknowledgement that loving someone does not mean you are always capable of showing the love in the right way. That the love is real even when the expression of it is wrong. That the son who provokes and the father who throttles are, in the moment after the throttle, still bound to each other in something that neither of them has words for, and both of them rely on. Homer chose his family over Cypress Creek. He chose Bart in that choice, along with Marge and Lisa and Maggie. He chose the house where the strangling happens, and the reconciliation follows, and the cycle begins again. He chose this specific form of love, imperfect and demonstrative and sometimes expressed with both hands around a 10-year-old's neck, because this specific form of love is what they have and what they are. The coma dream preserves it exactly as it is, not improved, not resolved, not matured into something calmer and more dignified. Exactly as it is. Bart provoking, Homer reacting, the throttle, the bounce, and then the two of them together at the kitchen table eating the same breakfast, ready for the next episode. Because this is what Homer loves, not a better version of Bart, not a version of himself that handles it more graciously. This version, this family, this morning, still, on sleep and what these stories are for. There is something appropriate about coming to the end of this particular journey in the small hours. The theories about The Simpsons are, in a sense, theories about consciousness, about what it means to be aware of your own situation and the limits of that awareness, about what happens when the mechanisms that allow you to see clearly are compromised by chemicals, by social pressure, by the accumulated weight of comfortable fictions that have been maintained for so long they feel like facts, about what the mind does when it cannot wake up and what the heart does when it cannot let go. Sleep is related to all of this. In sleep, the rational mind steps back and something else takes over. The processing mind, the dreaming mind, the part of us that does not distinguish between what we remember and what we fear and what we hope. The part of us that is working through something even when we are not actively working. The Simpsons watched late at night, half asleep, in the particular receptive state that comes in the hours when vigilance relaxes. This is a different experience from watching it in the day, alert and analytical, looking for evidence and patterns and the structural coherence of the theories. In the half-sleep, the show is what it feels like rather than what it means. And what it feels like, in the half-sleep, is warmth. A house that is lit, a family that is together. The sound of voices that know each other well, that have been having variations of the same conversations for decades, that carry in their rhythms and their affections the accumulated weight of a shared history that the show has been building since 1989. The theories tell you what to notice when you are paying attention. The warmth is what remains when you stop paying attention. And the warmth is not nothing. It is, in many ways, the more important thing. Homer loves his family. This is the truest sentence about The Simpsons that anyone has ever written. All the theories, and all the mysteries, and all the dark readings of Springfield's contaminated water, and corrupted institutions, and complicit medical establishment, and engineered cognitive fog, all of it is organized around this fact. Homer loves his family. The show has been telling you this for 36 years. It is telling you right now. And in the half-sleep, in the warm dark of wherever you are, you know it. Not as a critical observation, not as a theoretical claim, as the thing the show is made of, the thing that runs through every episode the way warmth runs through a house that has been lived in for a long time. Go to sleep. The family is fine. Springfield will be there in the morning. It always is. What 36 years looks like from the inside. There is a quality that very long-running things develop that shorter things cannot simulate, no matter how well they are made. A quality of sedimentation, of accumulated weight, of having been present for so many different versions of the world that the thing itself has become a kind of constant against which change is measured. The Simpsons has this quality now. It had it for a long time before most people consciously recognized it, but there is a moment different for different viewers. But there is a moment when watching The Simpsons stops being watching a television show and becomes something closer to visiting a place you have known your entire life. When the theme music plays and the couch gag runs, something happens that is not quite about the episode itself. Something that is about all the other times you sat down and heard that theme and felt the specific quality of being about to watch this particular show. This is what 3.5 decades does. It builds a relationship between the viewer and the show that operates the way long relationships between people operate, with the history embedded in every interaction, visible or not, shaping what the current moment means and feels like even when the current moment is not consciously referencing the history. You are not watching a single episode when you watch The Simpsons. You are watching a single episode inside the context of every episode that came before it. Every memory you have of watching the show at different ages and different circumstances, every version of yourself that has sat in front of the television and heard the Simpsons theme. The 10-year-old you who watched it because your parents watched it, the 15-year-old you who watched it because everyone at school quoted it, the 25-year-old you who watched it late at night in an apartment you had just moved into, when everything felt uncertain and the familiar theme was one of the things that felt certain, the 35-year-old you who put it on for background noise and found yourself actually watching, surprised by how much you still knew. The show does not just have your history in it. It has your history around it. The memories of watching it, at different ages and in different circumstances, form a kind of archive of your relationship with the show that the show itself, with its floating timeline and its eternal present, cannot contain but that you carry with you every time you sit down to watch it. This is the final mystery of The Simpsons, and it is the one that does not exist inside the show at all. It exists in the space between the show and the people who watch it, in the accumulated weight of all those hours, all those episodes, all those different versions of the same family doing the same things in the same town in a way that felt, each time, like coming home to something that had been waiting. The theories are beautiful because they reveal the architecture of a thing you love. Because they show you that the warmth you feel when the theme plays is not just nostalgia or habit, but a response to something genuine that the show has been building carefully and consistently for longer than most lives contain. The show is complicated. The show is dark in places and strange in others, and has been running long enough to contain contradictions that a shorter show would never have produced. But none of that changes the central fact that the show has spent 36 years returning to, episode after episode, in every reset and every couch gag and every moment where the credits roll and everything is fine. Homer loves his family. The family loves Homer. They are together, they are home, This is what the show is for. Not the mysteries and not the theories, though those are real and worth examining. Not the darkness and not the contamination and not the floating timeline, and not the question of whether any of it is real. Those are the architecture. The warmth is what the architecture holds. Every theory in this list is a way of paying attention to something the show has always been doing. A way of honoring the seriousness of a piece of culture that has sometimes been dismissed as a cartoon, as background noise, as something you watch when you do not want to think. The theories say, this is worth thinking about. This has depth. This has been telling you something for a very long time, and the telling has been careful and deliberate and more honest than most things that present themselves as honest. Take the theories seriously. They deserve the seriousness. And then, when the theories are put down and the analytical mode relaxes and the half-sleep comes, let the show be what it also is. A warm house in a town that cannot be found on any map, with a family that never ages, on a street that is everywhere, in the eternal Sunday evening of the American century. The light is on. Come in, sit down, the family is home. Good night from Springfield. Good night. The show within the show. Television as mirror. One of the most under-examined elements of The Simpsons is the role of television within the show itself. The Simpsons is a television show about a family that watches television. This is a structural loop that the show has never pretended is accidental. The family sits on the couch. They watch Itchy and Scratchy. They watch Kent Brockman. They watch the local news and the national news and the sitcoms and the cartoons that populate their world. Television is the background hum of the Simpson household, the constant companion of a family that, like many real families, uses the television not only as entertainment but as a shared activity, a way of being together without requiring anyone to speak or engage directly. Homer's relationship with television is the show's most direct comment on television itself. Homer loves television with an enthusiasm that is not quite ironic. He watches it. He is genuinely moved by it. He is genuinely frightened by it. He allows it to tell him things and then believes those things, and then acts on the beliefs in ways that produce the consequences that produce the episodes. This is a portrait of a particular kind of viewer, not a passive recipient, not a critical analyst. A person who is genuinely, vulnerably open to what television puts in front of them, who lets it move them, who is changed by the experience of watching in ways that are sometimes small and sometimes not small. The show is holding this mirror up to itself and to its audience with a consistency that the decades of episodes make visible in retrospect. The Simpsons has been showing you Homer watching television, being changed by what he watches, taking it seriously, finding meaning in it, and then acting on that meaning in ways that are sometimes wrong and sometimes right, and always entirely his for as long as the show has been running. This is not a criticism. It is a portrait. And the portrait is warm. Homer's openness to the television, his willingness to be genuinely affected by what he sees, is one of the most sympathetic things about him. He is not defended against it. He does not watch with ironic distance. He is right there, in front of the screen, letting it matter. There is something worth sitting with in the fact that you are doing the same thing right now. That you have spent this time inside a piece of media, letting it matter, finding things in it worth examining, being affected by the ideas about a cartoon family, and the things those ideas illuminate about families in general, and love in general, and the specific weight of caring about something that is held inside a television screen. Homer watches television with his whole self. The show has been honoring this for 36 years. It is honoring it right now, in you, watching. The couch is comfortable. The family is on the screen. The light is warm. Good night. A note on how to use this script. What follows is a journey through the deepest mysteries of The Simpsons, organized not by the order in which they are most commonly discussed, but by the order in which they escalate, from the merely strange to the genuinely unsettling. From the mysteries that the show acknowledges and plays with, to the ones that the show has never quite confronted directly even after 36 years. Each section is designed to be heard in a particular state, not the alert analytical state of someone looking for plot summaries or episode synopses. The state that comes later in the evening, when the day's vigilance has softened, when the mind is willing to follow a thought somewhere without needing to know in advance where it leads. The mysteries of The Simpsons reward this state. They are not mysteries with clean solutions and satisfying resolutions. They are mysteries that open onto other mysteries, that reveal, the more closely you look at them, that the show has been building something more complex and more layered than any individual episode or any individual theory can fully account for. The show is 36 years of accumulated detail. No single viewing, no single theory, no single interpretation captures all of it. What the theories do is give you a way in, a thread to pull, a lens through which to look at something familiar and find it strange again. Use them that way, not as definitive answers, but as invitations. Invitations to look more carefully at something you have already seen hundreds of times and find in it what you have not yet found. Springfield is waiting. It has always been waiting. It will still be waiting whenever you want to return. The question of canon. There is one more thing worth saying before the theories conclude, and it concerns the status of canonical facts in a show that has been running for 36 years with a floating timeline and a deliberate policy of inconsistency. What does it mean for something to be true in Springfield? The standard answer is that something is true in Springfield if the show depicts it happening, if the characters treat it as real, and if subsequent episodes do not contradict it. This is the definition of canon that most long-running shows operate by. It is a reasonable definition for shows whose continuity is carefully maintained. The Simpsons does not carefully maintain its continuity. The Simpsons maintains something more like a living continuity, a continuity that breathes and shifts and accommodates the needs of individual episodes without necessarily preserving perfect consistency with all previous episodes. The result is a show in which some things are clearly canonical. Homer loves his family, Burns runs the plant, Lisa plays saxophone, and many other things occupy a more ambiguous territory where they were depicted, they were treated as real, and they were never explicitly retracted. But they also do not appear to have ongoing consequences. The IQ test that found Maggie's intelligence unmeasurable, canonical. The implications of that fact for Maggie's character, ambiguous, because the show has not pursued them. The human skeletons in the basement of the nuclear plant, canonical. The explanation for whose skeletons they are or how they got there, absent. Homer's coma, canonical. Whether Homer woke up from it, the show says yes. The theory says the question is more complicated. This is not a flaw in the show, it is a feature. The show's ambiguity is the source of the theories. A show that tied up every loose end and explained every strange detail would leave nothing for the theories to work with. The show's willingness to introduce facts and then not pursue their implications to show you the three-eyed fish and then move on, to tell you about the skeletons and never return to them, creates the space where theories live. The space where the audience does the work the show declines to do, where you take the unexplained canonical facts and arrange them into patterns and see what the patterns reveal. This is what has been happening tonight. This is what the theories are. They are the audience taking the show seriously enough to do the work that the show gestures toward and then steps back from. They are acts of attention paid to something that deserves attention. They are, in the most honest sense, a form of love. You pay this kind of attention to things you love, and Springfield, strange and dark and impossible and warm, has given its audience a great deal to love. Sleep well. The mysteries will keep. The yellow that never fades. There is a color at the center of this show that has become, over 36 years, one of the most recognizable colors in the history of visual media. The yellow of The Simpsons. Not a natural yellow. Not the yellow of sunlight or of daffodils or of ripe wheat. A specific, saturated, cartoon yellow that appears on no human skin and has no equivalent in the spectrum of actual human skin tones. A yellow that was chosen by the show's designers in its earliest days and that has remained unchanged across every season, every remaster, every format upgrade. The mutation theory looks at this yellow and sees evidence. The animation department looks at it and sees a practical choice that made characters identifiable at any screen size. The coma theory looks at it and sees the specific quality of dreamlight, the slightly heightened saturation that dreams sometimes give to familiar faces. All of these are true simultaneously. The best details in great art are always overdetermined. They mean more than one thing. They carry more weight than they were necessarily put there to carry. The yellow of The Simpsons has been generating meaning for 36 years, accumulating resonance with every episode, becoming something richer than a color choice the longer it runs. It is the color of this specific family. It is the color that says, without any other information, that you are in Springfield, that these are the people, that this is the world. It is a color that belongs entirely to this show and that has become, for millions of people, associated with the specific feeling of this show in a way that makes it impossible to see that shade of yellow anywhere without some part of the mind moving briefly toward Evergreen Terrace. That is what 36 years does. That is what The Simpsons has built. A color that belongs to it, a town that cannot be found, a family that never ages, a dream that never ends. The light is still on in Springfield. The couch is still there. The family is still together on the same street, in the same house, in the same impossible town that has no state and no coordinates and no map that could locate it, because it does not need a map. You know where it is. You have always known where it is. Good night. And one more thing. The show has never told you where Springfield is. It has never resolved whether Homer woke up. It has never explained the skeletons in the basement of the plant. It has never revealed what Maggie is going to do when she finally speaks. It has never told you how Burns is still alive after a century of radiation and disease and being shot by an infant and abandoned in the wilderness and all the rest of it. It has never told you whether the water is safe. It has never told you whether the fog inside the heads of Springfield's residents is the radiation, or the denial, or the dream, or simply the fog that comes with being human in a world that has more weight than any individual person can fully hold. These are the things it is not going to tell you. They are the things it has been not telling you for 36 years, carefully, with extraordinary consistency, in a way that keeps them present and alive and generating questions rather than resolving into answers and going quiet. The mysteries are the show. The show is the mysteries. And the space between knowing and not knowing, the specific alive quality of a question that has not yet been closed, this is the space the show has been living in since 1989 and continues to live in, and it is a remarkably comfortable space once you stop trying to resolve it. The Simpsons does not need to be solved. It needs to be sat with. In the dark, in the late hours, with the warmth still running underneath the strangeness, and the family still there on the couch, and the light still on in the house on Evergreen Terrace, that is enough. That has always been enough. Good night. And the light still on in the house on Evergreen Terrace, that is enough. That has always been enough. Good night.